Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the cloisters, the candlelight barely strong enough to show the grooves in the long wooden tables. You picture yourself entering that stone scriptorium, the one with tall, narrow windows that let in almost no light at all, just enough for shadows to stretch across the pages of the monk's parchment. The air is thick with the smell of wax, ink and vellum, but there's something else, too. A faint tang, not entirely out of place in a monastery, where food is always in short supply. The smell of cheese lingering after the day's meager supper. You probably won't survive this. Not because anything dangerous is going to happen, but because if you were dropped into this world of cold stone floors, endless prayers, and strictly rationed cheese slices, you'd be sneaking to the pantry by the second night and promptly excommunicated for gluttony. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening while settling down for bed, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when in the world you're tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself seated at a long bench, the hum of quills scratching parchment echoing faintly in your ears. Brother Matthew is bent over his work, copying lines of scripture with painstaking care. The only break in the stillness comes from the flutter of his wool sleeve against the parchment, and the occasional sigh from another monk whose candle sputters out too soon. The scriptorium at night is both sacred and mundane, a place where the holiness of the word collides with the simple bodily reality of monks who had cheese on their breath from supper just moments before. The mainstream fact you grasp here is that monasteries in medieval Europe function as hubs of literacy and preservation. Scriptoria like this one were where entire libraries were slowly, laboriously copied by hand. The funny part, of course, is that while they were preserving Cicero or Augustine, someone was probably sneaking a thought about whether tomorrow's cheese ration would be as thin as today's. You notice that one monk, perhaps Brother Oswald, lingers over his copying, his stomach growling audibly. He shifts in his seat, clearly distracted. It isn't only hunger that plagues him, but also fairness. Earlier that evening, in the refectory, he had watched another monk receive what looked suspiciously like a thicker wedge of cheese. The room had been silent, as it always was during meals, but Oswald's eyes had narrowed. Imagine stewing about cheese distribution so much that it interrupted the copying of holy texts. Yet, in truth, food equality was one of the many causes for tension behind monastery walls. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some abbeys were known to scent their scriptoriums with herbs to disguise the stale smell of food and sweat. Lavender and rosemary sprigs would hang from the beams, not for decoration, but as medieval air freshener. Historians still argue whether the monks were more distracted by the tantalizing smell of cheese from dinner or by the pungent herbs that try to mask it. Either way, you sit here, caught between rosemary sprigs tickling your nose and the aftertaste of curds on your tongue. The candles hiss as another monk trims a wick. You imagine your own fingers smudged with ink, the quill wobbling as you try to keep the Latin letters steady. The discipline of silence is nearly overwhelming. Without the ability to murmur complaints, every emotion is communicated through glares, sighs, or subtle shifts of the wooden bowls at supper. You replay the image of Brother Thomas earlier, tilt his head ever so slightly to examine whether his portion was truly equal to that of Brother Andrew. That sort of silent suspicion fuels the odd arguments about cheese portions that echo long after prayers have ended. Your senses slow. The yellow glow softens edges of manuscripts stacked neatly on shelves. Some are chained, for they are considered treasures, though to you they look like heavy books with tired leather bindings. It's almost comic. Manuscripts chained up for security, while the cheese wheels and cellar below are under equally watchful eyes. You picture yourself wandering, candle in hand, through the hall, the silence thick. The wax drips between your fingers, a small sting against your skin. And somewhere nearby from another chamber, you catch the faint creak of a door. The kitchen steward double-checking supplies, maybe counting loaves and cheese wheels yet again. If he finds one wedge missing, tomorrow's supper could turn into a whispered scandal. Your eyelids begin to feel heavy, but your mind drifts toward questions. Why cheese? Why was it so central? Historians still argue whether it was simply the convenience. cheese stores well in cool cellars, or whether monks attached deeper symbolic meaning to it. After all, curds formed from milk could be seen as an image of transformation, an echo of spiritual life. But at this late hour, transformation feels less pressing than the hope of a decent night's sleep, without another monk's stomach growling like thunder beside you. The candles sputter again. Brother Matthew straightens his back, rolling his shoulders with an audible crack. He scratches another line of text, steady as stone. You trace the letters in your imagination, each curve deliberate, each stroke infused with devotion. But behind it, you sense the background hum of very human needs. A life of prayer, yes, but also a life of meager rations and suspicious glances at the cheese knife. You sigh, leaning against a wooden bench. Outside, the night wind rattles to the narrow glass panes, whistling faintly. You shiver. The stones are cold, the air colder still, and yet the memory of cheese warmth lingers on your tongue. Sleep calls, soft as a page turning, steady as the scratching of quills, lulling you into the strange comfort of this candlelit world, where arguments over portions are as heated as theological debates. The bells toll again, soft but insistent, vibrating through the stone corridors and pulling you into the rhythm of the abbey. You hear them echo across the cloister, bouncing off pillars like a heartbeat that never rests. These bells are more than background noise. They're the spine of monastic life. They announce when you rise, when you pray, when you copy manuscripts, and when you eat. And of course, they also mark the most delicate moment of the day, when the cheese portion is finally placed in your wooden bowl. Mainstream fact first, monastic schedules were built around the canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Each prayer time was announced by bells, and meals were slotted neatly between them. The bells weren't negotiable. If you thought you could sneak in a nap, too bad. The bronze tongue of the abbey would pull you out of bed whether you liked it or not. And when sext ended at midday, it meant lunch, which for most monasteries was bread, a little ale, and, yes, a carefully measured wedge of cheese. You shuffle in line with the other monks into the refectory. The long tables are lined with identical bowls and spoons, each set with monastic precision. The quiet is thick. Only the bell has the right to break it. You lower yourself onto the bench, aware of the scrape of wood, the shuffle of robes. The abbot intones a blessing, the words rolling like the toll of the bell itself. And then, finally, the stewards bring out the bread and cheese. The quirky tidbit slides in. Some abbeys had rules forbidding monks from licking their knives after cutting cheese. Imagine needing a written rule for that. It means someone, somewhere, just couldn't resist making sure every crumb of dairy fat made its way into his mouth. You picture Brother Peter sitting there, blade glistening, eyes darting as he guiltily gives a swipe. You stifle a laugh, which, in this room of silence, would have gotten you a glare sharp enough to shave the rind off any cheese wheel. The portions themselves are modest, always modest, just enough to keep you upright for the hours of prayer and work that follow. You watch as each monk receives a share. The cellarer places the slices with careful attention, like a man performing surgery. His job is not only to distribute fairly, but also to ensure no one can claim favoritism. Yet you notice the glances. Always the glances. Brother Thomas still peers sideways at Brother Andrew, just as last night. Did Andrew get more? Did the knife lean a little heavier in his favor? Historians still argue whether such suspicions ever boiled into real conflict or remained a kind of petty tension that hummed quietly in the background of daily life. Your eyes wander to the windows of the refectory. Thin slits let in only weak light, but it's enough to catch the floating dust motes. The bells have ceased, but the rhythm they created lingers. You take a bite of bread, soft on the inside, tough on the crust, and the cheese crumbles slightly against your tongue. It isn't luxurious, but it is filling enough. The silence turns your chewing into a thunderclap in your own head. You almost want to cough just to hear something other than your own jaw. But the monks have tricks for the silence. They signal with their hands. Small gestures rehearsed over decades. A lift of the spoon could mean, please pass the salt. A tilt of the head could mean, you've dropped crumbs. And an arched eyebrow might just mean, I saw how thick your cheese slice was. You can't help but smile at the thought Silent sign language for cheese envy. You catch the eye of the reader. In many abbeys, one monk would stand and read scripture aloud during meals, so even eating was a moment of prayerful reflection. The words float across the hall in a droning rhythm. He speaks of heavenly bread, of manna, of spiritual nourishment. You smirk quietly, because while his words hover in the air, you're busy counting the crumbs of very earthly cheese. The bells, you realize, are the invisible master here. They keep the monks from speaking, because what more could be said when life is dictated by bronze tones? You picture the bell ringer himself, trudging up the tower stairs, pulling on ropes with blister hands. He probably doesn't think much about cheese portions, but in a way, he controls them. Without his signals, no one would know when to eat. You feel the heaviness of routine settling over your shoulders. The day is divided, and you are caught inside it like a note on the bell's vibration. Wake, pray, work. Eat, pray, work. Pray again, then sleep. Cheese arrives not as a treat, but as a marker, proof that another block of hours has passed. And yet, the monks cling to it, argue about it, measure it with jealous eyes. It becomes more than food. It becomes time itself, portioned out in edible wedges. The blessing ends. The scraping of bowls begins, and soon the monks file out again, bell-driven to their next labor. You rise with them, bread and cheese settling in your stomach. Your ears still ring faintly with the last toll, as though the monastery itself is whispering. One more prayer, one more slice, one more day measured out by bronze and dairy. You lean into the worn with a choir stall, your mind still replaying the steady drone of the midday bell. The sound is faded, but its echo nudges you toward the very book that governs all these slices and servings, the Rule of St. Benedict. This text, written in the 6th century, has seeped into every stone and habit of monastic life. You open its pages with reverence, though the smell of ink and vellum mixes again with that faint, nagging aroma of cheese that clings to every surface of the abbey. The mainstream fact presents itself clearly. The Rule of St. Benedict was a foundational guide for Western monasticism. It structured prayer, work, obedience, humility, and, crucially, food. The passages about meals insist on moderation. Bread, fruit, vegetables, and, when permitted, wine and cheese. But moderation is a slippery thing, especially when you're starving after 6 hours of chanting psalms. Moderation to Brother Andrew might mean a thick slice. Moderation to Brother Thomas might mean a paper-thin shaving. And therein lies the trouble. You trace your finger across a Latin line that advises monks not to complain. It sounds simple. Don't complain. Yet you've seen firsthand how one suspiciously uneven wedge of cheese can turn silent eyes into daggers. Historians still argue whether the rule's wording on food was intentionally vague, perhaps leaving room for abbots to interpret based on resources, or whether Benedict simply underestimated the power of dairy envy. Now, the quirky tidbit, tucked into some manuscript copies of the rule, are marginal notes from later monks. Imagine reading a sacred text only to find in the corner, scribbled in cramped handwriting, this line about moderation doesn't mean Brother Matthew can hog the cheese. You smile at the thought of centuries-old monks using margins the way modern students doodle snarky comments in textbooks. The hall feels hushed, the lamps casting long shadows. You imagine the abbot himself reading aloud these words of the rule, his voice solemn, measured, like the tolling bell. The monks nod, but you sense their minds wandering. They're picturing their bowls at supper, wondering if tonight's portion will feel fair, if moderation will taste like generosity or like punishment. You glance at Brother Oswald again, remembering with a growling stomach. He's clearly one of those monks who reads every line of the rule as if it applies directly to his cheese ration. Moderation is fine, but justice, he whispers to himself, is better. You almost laugh, because you can hear him turning Benedict's spiritual discipline into a dairy courtroom. The rule also insists on humility. Accept what you're given, don't argue, don't envy. Easy to say, harder to live. The bell can tell you when to eat, but it can't tell your heart not to glance sideways. You watch Oswald's eyes flicker again at the thought of Brother Andrew's slice. That silent jealousy, thicker than the bread, becomes part of the meal itself. And you know what? You probably wouldn't survive this either. Imagine being told that one small wedge of cheese is both enough for your body and enough for your soul. No late-night snacks, no second helpings, no opening the fridge because your brain craves salt. Just silence, prayer, and the rule of Benedict reminding you that moderation is a path to holiness. You, a modern listener, would last about 2 meals before trying to bribe the kitchen steward with an extra psalm. You shift on the wooden bench, feeling the uneven groove beneath you. The rule doesn't mention comfort. It doesn't say, give them cushions, or let them nap longer they're cranky. It assumes you'll just endure. Cheese, too, is part of this endurance. Enough to keep you alive, not enough to make you satisfied. Moderation is a holy burden. Yet, historians still argue whether the rule was ever followed to the letter. Did abbots secretly bend the words when supplies were abundant? Did monks roll their eyes behind closed doors, thinking moderation was fine in theory but nonsense in practice? You picture them debating in whispers, one quoting Latin. Another pointed the cheese knife as Exhibit A. The candle burns low. The letters blur slightly in the dim light, but the meaning remains sharp. This book is not just words. It is lived day after day, bite after bite. The rule ties holiness to food portions, prayer to patience, humility to cheese envy. And you, leaning in, realize that what seems boring, measuring rations, is actually the heartbeat of the silent world. You exhale long and slow. As the rule is closed again, the clasp clicking softly. The words sink into the silence like stones in water, rippling outward. Somewhere in those ripples lies a memory of dinner past, and the anticipation of dinner yet to come. Cheese, bread, and silence, bound together by a rule written centuries earlier, still holding tight. You slip back into the refectory, the scent of old wood and smoke from the kitchen hearth hanging in the air. Tonight feels heavy, as though the stones themselves are listening. The stewards shuffle in, robes brushing against the floor, carrying trays with bowls, loaves, and that ever-controversial stack of cheese wedges. You sit with the monks, shoulder to shoulder, all eyes fixed on the cellarer, the man with a knife, the gatekeeper of fairness. The mainstream fact unfolds before you. Monasteries assigned clear duties. The cellarer oversaw food, drink, and supplies, ensuring that no one went hungry, but also that nothing was wasted. He wasn't just a cook. He was an accountant, a manager, sometimes a referee. In a community that prized silence and obedience, the kitchen could still spark conflict. A slightly heavier slice of cheese might not sound like mutiny, but in this world, where every crumb was counted, it mattered. You watch as he presses a knife through the pale wedge, dividing it into portions that are nearly identical. Nearly. Brother Thomas tilts his head, squinting. Brother Andrew raises his brow. Brother Oswald lets out the faintest sigh through his nose. The silence is almost comical. No one dares speak, but everyone is thinking the same thing. Was that slice thicker? And here comes a quirky tidbit. Some kitchen records from monasteries note punishments for food mismanagement. Once, a cellarer was reportedly required to eat plain boiled beans for a week because he failed to divide cheese portions evenly. Imagine that. Boiled beans as penance. A fate so dull it feels like divine justice. You almost chuckle at the idea, but quickly smother it, because in the refectory, even laughter is forbidden. The tension thickens. The cellarer glances up as if he can feel the stares burning into him. He wipes the knife, sets it down, and nods to the abbot. The meal can begin. You pick up your bread and cheese, the crust rough against your fingers, the wedge crumbling just a little at the edges. You take a bite, and suddenly the whole room seems to chew in unison, like a choir of jaws moving in rhythm. You can't help but think how absurd it is. Here are men dedicated to prayer, to silence, to copying holy texts, and yet they are fixated on whether Brother Thomas got an extra gram of dairy. Historians still argue whether this pettiness was exaggerated in records, perhaps used as teaching stories, or whether monks truly obsessed over it nightly. Either way, in the moment, the suspicion is palpable. Your eyes drift to the end of the table, where 2 stewards exchange subtle glances. You imagine their whispered conversation earlier in the kitchen. Did you cut Brother Thomas's too thick? I don't think so. Maybe Andrew's is just smaller. Well, now they'll stare at us all through supper. And of course they do. The abbot clears his throat, and scripture begins to be read aloud. The words fill the hall, a steady drone meant to lift thoughts to heaven. Yet your mind lingers stubbornly on earth, circling cheese wedges like a mouse waiting for crumbs. The passage being read is about justice, about treating one another with fairness. You smirk inwardly at the irony. The monks listen, nodding solemnly, but their eyes still wander toward their bowls. The silence after the reading is louder than the words. Chewing becomes suspiciously slow, as if everyone is savoring or measuring. The clink of a spoon sounds like thunder. You notice Brother Oswald shifting in his seat again, and you imagine his inner monologue. This isn't about greed. It's about fairness. Moderation is one thing. Injustice is another. The refectory is supposed to be a place of peace, a shared meal as holy as prayer. But tonight, as you sit among them, it feels more like a courtroom. Each monk silently judging the steward's knife. The cheese, humble as it is, has become evidence in a trial that will never be spoken aloud. You glance toward the cellarer, who keeps his eyes fixed on the floor. He knows. He always knows. The monastery can survive cold winters, meager harvests, and the endless toll of bells, but divide the cheese unevenly, and suddenly the harmony trembles. And so you chew slowly, tasting not only the tang of dairy, but also the unspoken tension that seasons it. You swallow, and with it, the knowledge that fairness in food is never truly simple. Not here, not under stone arches, not in silence, where even a glance can be an argument. You ease back in your seat, the chill of the stone wall pressing against your shoulder, and notice how the conversation around cheese begins to spill beyond fairness. Tonight, the monks don't just eye each other's slices. They murmur softly, in rare moments of a loud speech, about cheese as more than food, as medicine. You let the thoughts settle in, amused and strangely fascinated. The mainstream fact is that medieval medicine often blurred the line between diet and cure. Monks, with their access to text and their careful observation of daily life, believed cheese could treat certain ailments. You hear Brother Matthew mutter that a small wedge of hard cheese steadies the stomach after fasting. Brother Oswald insists that soft curds ease melancholy, which is considered one of the four humors troubling the body. You picture a monk, pale and weary from too many hours bent over parchment, chewing cheese like you'd swallow an aspirin today. The quirky tidbit pops into your mind. In one herbal manual, cheese mixed with garlic was suggested as a cure for damp lungs. That's medieval speak for a hacking cough or the kind of chest cold you get from sitting in drafty stone cloisters all day. You try not to laugh, imagining Brother Thomas wheezing through Vespers, stuffing down garlic cheese paced with a solemn belief it will help. The abbey must have smelled like a mix between a dairy and a garlic festival. You let your mind wander further. Cheese wasn't only eaten, it was prescribed. Some monks scribbled marginal notes about which varieties cured headaches best. Hard, salty wheels versus fresh, creamy curds. Historians still argue whether these notes were serious medical guidance or just excuses for more dairy on fasting days. Was it piety, or just clever loopholes dressed up as health advice? The refectory grows quiet again, but you can still sense the undercurrent. A novice rubs his temples, and an older monk pats him on the shoulder, sliding over a chunk of cheese with a knowing nod, like a medieval pharmacist handing out medicine. You almost grin at the tenderness of it. No bottle, no spoonful of sugar, just cheese, wrapped in layers of ritual and belief. You chew your own portion slowly, imagining the monks justifying every bite. It's not indulgence. You can hear them saying silently, "It's for my health." You picture Brother Andrew using that excuse. So often the kitchen steward rolls his eyes every time. And you catch yourself thinking, wouldn't you do the same? A midnight snack justified as doctor's orders has been a universal temptation across the ages. The bells ring faintly outside, a reminder that time moves whether your stomach aches or not. The monks rise to return to their duties, some to the garden, some to the library, some back to the scriptorium. You follow, the idea of cheese as medicine still clinging to you. The smell of dairy lingers in your nostrils, oddly comforting, like a strange ointment for your own weary thoughts. You trail a group of monks toward the infirmary. The shelves are lined with jars of dried herbs, bundles of sage, tiny vials of resin. And on the table, a small wheel of cheese, resting like it belongs among the medicines. You can't decide if it looks out of place or perfectly at home. The infirmarian, his robe sleeves rolled, explains to a novice how cheese balances the humors when eaten with moderation. You smirk inwardly. There's that word again, moderation. The anchor of everything here. Eat too little, you weaken. Eat too much, you bloat. Eat just enough, you are healed. You glance back to Brother Oswald, who takes a piece and nods solemnly as if the act itself is sacrament. He seems convinced. You wonder if the headache fades because of the cheese, or simply because someone cared enough to offer it. That kind of healing is hard to measure, but it is real. Your eyelids grow heavier as the infirmary hums with quiet devotion. The flicker of candles against stone walls, the smell of dried rosemary, and the faint tang of cheese. Together they weave a lullaby of sorts. And as you settle into the rhythm of this world, you realize you've learned something. For these monks, even a humblest food is not only a meal, not only a point of contention, but also a cure, a symbol, and a comfort. The shadows grow longer across the cloister as you trail the monks toward the evening meal. You notice a change in their pace, not sluggish exactly, but hesitant, as though every footstep carries the weight of rules wrapped in centuries of ritual. Tonight is Par Lent, that long season of fasting and penitence, and the air is thick with unspoken tension. Cheese, of all things, becomes a quiet battlefield. The mainstream fact lands softly. Lent in medieval monasteries was a strict affair. Meat was banned entirely. Fish permitted sparingly, and dairy, including cheese, was officially off limits. Yet, here you are, watching stewards carry trays where small wedges of cheese appear nonetheless, tucked between bread and greens. The monks lower their eyes, pretending not to notice too much. The abbot clears his throat before the blessing, his tone caught somewhere between solemnity and a wink. You catch the quirky tidbit whispered in the corner. In some abbeys, monks bend the rules by classifying cheese as a neutral food, not quite flesh, not quite indulgence. One inventive brother even argued that curdled milk was closer to medicine than a food, and therefore, surely, the Lord wouldn't mind. You imagine the theological gymnastics required to convince yourself that a chunk of cheddar was holy cough syrup. It's a loophole so wide you could roll an entire wheel of Parmesan through it. Still, historians argue whether these compromises were deliberate acts of rebellion or simply practical survival. After all, not every monastery could feed dozens of men through harsh winters without dairy. Was the rule being slyly stretched, or was it an act of mercy cloaked in ritual? You picture a council of abbots debating with furrowed brows, while half their minds lingered on the cheese platter beside them. You sit again in the refectory. The silence descends like a heavy curtain. Bread is broken, bowls are filled, and the cheese wedges are slid discreetly onto plates. No one says anything, but everyone notices. A novice bites his lip, clearly torn between obedience to the fasting law and the simple joy of food. He chews slowly, as though stretching out each second, convincing himself it's more prayer than indulgence. The reader stands and recites scripture in a monotone voice, passages about discipline, about sacrifice. The words wash over you, solemn and steady, while your teeth grind through bread and curds that were not supposed to be here at all. You find yourself smiling faintly. Isn't that human? Even in the strictest silence, in the most rigid season of denial, the monks found ways to slip in comfort, quietly, gently, pretending nothing had happened. The candlelight flickers, throwing long shadows against the stone. The cellarer shifts uneasily at the end of the table. He's the one who decides how far to stretch the rule, how thin or thick the slices may be. His eyes dart to the abbot, searching for approval or maybe forgiveness. You imagine him defending himself. Better to bend the law a little than to watch brothers collapse from hunger. And then there's Brother Oswald, who you've been watching since the beginning. He chews with the same furrowed brow, always measuring fairness. Tonight, though, he looks softer, almost grateful. Maybe even he realizes that Lent without cheese would turn prayers into groans and silence into rebellion. He closes his eyes, whispers grace, and takes another careful bite. Your mind drifts as the meal continues. The candles, the scripture, the silence, all of it becomes a blur, like waves lapping against the shore. You picture loopholes written into the air, monks convincing themselves that holiness can coexist with hunger, but also with comfort. The abbey breathes in rhythm. The bells echo soft in the distance, and for a moment, everything feels suspended, caught between rules and mercy, sacrifice and satisfaction. The cheese wedges vanish quietly. The plates scrape clean, and the monks file out once more. Their sandals scuff the floor, their shadows stretch tall along the corridor, and you trail behind, drowsy, lulled by the soft collision of discipline and indulgence. The air cools as you descend a narrow spiral staircase, the stone worn smooth by centuries of careful steps. A lantern sways in your hand, casting shaky circles of light against damp walls. The monks rarely allow visitors down here, but tonight you follow them into the abbey's hidden treasure, the cheese cellars. The moment a heavy wooden door creaks open, a wave of earthy, tangy aroma envelopes you, thicker than the incense drifting in the chapel above. The mainstream fact greets you at once. Medieval monasteries were among the most skilled producers of cheese in Europe. Their cellars were cool, constant in temperature, and perfect for aging wheels that could last months or even years. In fact, some of the famous European cheeses that exist today, like Munster or Roquefort, trace their roots back to monastic experiments with curds and caves. You picture monks as unlikely scientists, measuring time not in laboratory beakers, but in rind thickness. You step deeper into the vault, the air clammy against your skin. Wheels of cheese sit stacked on wooden planks, each marked with carved symbols or scratched notes. They look like manuscripts in their own right, round books of dairy knowledge. You brush your fingers across one rind and feel the rough crust, dusted with a bloom of mold. Don't wrinkle your nose too much. This mold, to the monks, is holy progress. Here comes a quirky tidbit. Some records suggest that monks occasionally carved prayers or psalm numbers into the cheese wheels before storage, as if asking God to bless the curd through its long sleep underground. Imagine a wedge of cheddar doubling as scripture, edible devotion hidden beneath the rind. You almost laugh picturing a monk solemnly inscribing Psalm 23 onto dairy, only for a novice to devour it weeks later without noticing. Historians still argue whether these carvings were truly widespread practice or just symbolic stories preserved in a handful of manuscripts. Was every wheel inscribed, or only those meant for important feast days? No one can quite agree, and the silence of the cellar doesn't give you answers. It only hums with possibility. The cellarer walks ahead of you, running his hand along the shelves. His eyes gleam in the lantern glow as he counts, checks, and double-checks. Each wheel is accounted for just as carefully as books in the library above. Down here, cheese is as precious as parchment, and theft, even a tiny slice, would be sacrilege. You pause to take in the soundscape. Water dripping faintly in the corner, the muffled steps of sandaled feet, the quiet sigh of the cellarer as he straightens a stack. Your breath feels louder than it should. You catch yourself tiptoeing, afraid to disturb the sacred slumber of dairy wheels lined in endless rows. Then you notice something odd. A faint scratching on one of the shelves, marks not made by monks but by mice. Of course, mice are the eternal rivals here, sneaking through cracks to nibble the corners of holy provisions. You grin, imagining silent battles fought in the dark between cellarers armed with broomsticks and armies of mice determined to steal sacred cheese. You picture Brother Oswald standing guard, swatting at shadows, all in the name of fairness and ration control. The monks move slowly through the rows, turning wheels, muttering soft prayers. You lean closer and realize the process is almost meditative. Each wheel is touched, smelled, tapped lightly with knuckles to test ripeness. It's not just food storage. It's devotion disguised as daily labor. You can almost hear one mutter, "God turns milk into curds. We simply watch it age." The lantern flickers. The walls seem to breathe, stones exhaling cool air that lingers on your skin. You feel the weight of centuries pressing close. Yet it's not oppressive. It's soothing, rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock that never hurries. You let your shoulders drop, your breath slow. The smell, once sharp, now feels comforting, like a blanket of earth and time wrapping around you. You tilt your head back and imagine the abbey above. Monks chanting in the chapel, novices studying in the library, bells preparing to toll again. And here you are, beneath it all, in the heart of their hidden wealth. Cheese wheels resting like sleeping saints. You wonder if future generations will ever know these flavors, or if modern palates have lost the patience for slow, musty perfection. One last glance. The cellar door creaks close behind you, sealing the darkness, the prayers, and the wheels within. You step back into the corridor, the cool air following like a secret, and you realize that here in the hush of stone and mold, even arguments about fairness seem quieter, softened by the simple fact that cheese is not just eaten. It is guarded, cherished, and aged into meaning. You climb back into the cloister, brushing the cellar's cool damp from your sleeves, and find yourself drawn toward the Abbey gatehouse. Outside, a ragged line of pilgrims waits, their cloaks heavy with dust, their sandals nearly falling apart. They shuffle forward under the watchful gaze of the porter, who unlocks the thick oak door only long enough to let them in 2 by 2. You trail behind, curious to see what welcome they receive and what role cheese will play in it. The mainstream fact slips in. Monasteries were required by their rule to offer hospitality. Travelers, beggars, nobles, even wandering minstrels might find a bed, a bath, and most importantly, a meal within abbey walls. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an obligation. To turn away a pilgrim was to risk offending both man and God. And so the kitchen stewards carried an extra burden, not just feeding the monks fairly, but also portioning out food for the endless tide of visitors. You watch as a group of tired travelers is led to a wooden table near the gatehouse. Their eyes light up as bowls of warm broth are set down, followed by rough bread and, yes, a small sliver of cheese for each. The portions are humble, almost miserly by modern standards, but to someone who has walked miles through mud and wind, even a wedge the size of your thumb feels like luxury. The quirky tidbit emerges here. Some abbeys were known for their cheese generosity, and pilgrims would compare notes as they traveled. At St. Albans, they give 2 slices. One might whisper. At Cluny, you'll get only crumbs, but the bread is fresher. In this way, monasteries earned reputations not only for piety, but also for their catering, like medieval Yelp reviews carved into memory and song. You chuckle, imagining a weary pilgrim singing praise not the abbot's sermons, but the abbey's cheddar portions. You glance toward Brother Oswald, who lurks nearby, his brow furrowed as usual. He doesn't trust the generosity. To him, every wedge given away to a stranger is one wedge less of the community. His lips press tight, and you can almost hear him thinking, justice for brothers first, guests second. Yet, the rule is clear. The guest is Christ himself, and denying cheese to Christ is unthinkable. Still, historians argue whether monasteries ever truly balanced this duty. Did the monks quietly resent the flow of hungry mouths? Or did they embrace it, proud to share their dairy wealth with the world? The silence of the records leaves the question open. The pilgrims eat noisily, their laughter spilling into the quiet cloister. You watch the monks stiffen, unused to such chatter during meals. A child giggles, crumbs scattering across the table, and a steward quickly sweeps them up, saving every scrap. You realize with a pang of humor that even holy hospitality comes with a side of stress. The bells toll faintly from the chapel, and the monks rise to return to prayer. The guests remain, chewing slowly, savoring the last bites of cheese. You linger with them, sharing their relief. For them, this wedge is more than food. It is proof of survival, a reminder that the road, however harsh, will always offer some kindness. The sun dips lower outside the gatehouse. The porter shuts the door with a heavy thud, sealing the abbey once more. You catch the last glance of the pilgrim, his eyes bright with gratitude, and you know he will carry the taste of that cheese in his memory, perhaps even more vividly than the words of scripture he heard along the way. You sigh, leaning into the quiet again. The abbey breathes steadily, as though exhaling after the bustle of guests. Cheese, once again, has been divided, portioned, argued over, but also shared, gifted, remembered. And you, drifting into rhythm of bells and footsteps, realize that generosity tastes just as sharp and lasting as envy. You drift back into the cloister, the echoes of pilgrims' laughter fading, and turn toward a smaller room tucked behind the refectory. The smell hits you first, parchment dust mixed with faint tang of dairy, and then the sight of rows of wooden shelves stacked with ledgers, rolls of parchment tied with fraying cords, and a table where 2 scribes bend over their work. Welcome to monastic accounts, where every wedge of cheese is not only sliced, but also carefully inked into record. The mainstream fact rests clearly before you. Monasteries were early masters of bookkeeping. The cellarer, often assisted by scribes, kept meticulous tallies of grain, ale, vegetables, and yes, cheese wheels. These records mattered because abbeys weren't just holy houses. They were economic engines, feeding dozens of monks and countless visitors. A missing wheel wasn't simply hunger. It was imbalance in a fragile system. You watched the quills dance, scratching neat rows of numbers and Latin notations, each stroke a reminder that holiness required math as much as prayer. One scribe mutters under his breath as he tallies. He frowns, tapping his quill against the parchment. 3 wheels delivered last week, 2 consumed, 1 reserved for Lent, but his voice trails off and you lean closer. There's 1 wedge unaccounted for. Just a wedge. Barely enough to fill a novice's hollow stomach. Yet, in the silence of the abbey, this tiny discrepancy feels like thunder. The quirky tidbit comes in here. Some surviving ledgers show doodles in the margins, tiny sketches of cheese wheels with wedges missing or stick figures carrying baskets. You picture a bored monk, stuck adding columns all day, let his imagination leak into the parchment. It's oddly human, like finding cartoons scribbled in the margins of a tax form. You can almost hear Brother Matthew mutter, "If I have to count another wheel, I'll draw 1 instead." Historians still argue whether the accuracy of these records was impeccable or prone to creative editing. Were monks as scrupulous with cheese tallies as they were with scripture? Or did cellarers quietly adjust numbers to cover shortages, smoothing out discrepancies with a stroke of quill? You smile at the thought, pious men fudging numbers over dairy disputes. It makes you wonder if the first accountants ever lost sleep not over embezzlement, but over missing curds. The candle flickers, casting uneven light across the parchment. The scribe rubs his eyes, sighs, and dips his quill again. Each number feels like a prayer disguised as arithmetic, each line binding the community tighter. Cheese is not just food. It is economy, equity, and a test of trust. You notice how the cellarer leans close, scanning the page, his face pinched. He cannot risk being accused of favoritism. In a world where silence rules, numbers do the talking. You lean back, the smell of ink strong in your nose, and imagine the cellarer creeping into the cellars at night, recounting wheels in the dim light, trying to solve the mystery of the missing wedge. Was it a novice sneaking food? A pilgrim given extra charity? A steward shaving off crumbs for himself? No one dares ask out loud. The account book will bear the weight of the truth, or at least a neat fiction of it. You sigh, letting your eyelids grow heavier as the scribes continue their careful work. The scratching of quills against parchment becomes a lullaby, steady, hypnotic. You picture the rows of numbers turning into patterns, a hum of balance and order. Cheese wheels stacked not only in cellars but in ink, preserved as much on parchment as on wood. The scribe finally sits back, flexing his cramped fingers, and the cellarer nods, satisfied, or maybe just resigned. Another day accounted for. Another wedge lost in silence. You slip out of the room with the faintest smile, realizing that in this monastery, cheese is not only eaten, not only fought over, but written down like scripture, a memory fixed in ink, fragile but enduring. You follow the monks again into the refectory, that long echoing hall where food is more ritual than indulgence. Tonight, the silence is absolute, so thick you can hear the faintest scrape of wooden bowls against the table. You take your place among them, head bowed, hands folded, and wait. The blessing is spoken, short and firm, and then the portions appear, bread, broth, and, of course, cheese. The mainstream fact comes gently into view. During meals, most monasteries forbade talking. Instead, one monk read scripture or a saint's life aloud, while the others listened in silence. Food was never about conversation. It was about discipline, reflection, and obedience. You glance at the reader now, his voice steady, rolling over the words of a psalm that speaks of fairness and mercy. But fairness and mercy feel distant as you watch the cellarer lay down wedges of cheese with his careful, deliberate hand. The quiet is mesmerizing. You chew slowly, the texture of bread rough against your tongue, the cheese soft and tangy, almost sweet in contrast. Every bite echoes in your head, loud as thunder. You think about how strange it is to sit with dozens of men in utter silence. The only soundtrack the rustle of robes, the creak of benches, the faint click of teeth. No banner, no jokes, no whisper complaints. Just the sound of human bodies feeding themselves like clockwork. Then the quirky tidbit arrives. Some monasteries developed elaborate sign languages for mealtime. A twist of the hand might mean pass the salt. A finger on the nose might mean more bread. And, humorously enough, there are even signs for cheese. You imagine the monks flashing signals back and forth, like silent poker players, each gesture carrying its own tiny politics. One crooked finger could mean, I saw your slice is bigger than mine. Another might mean, save me a bit for later. You suppress a laugh, your shoulders shaking, which earns you a sharp glare from Brother Oswald. Historians still argue whether these sign languages were formalized systems or just improvised gestures passed down within each abbey. Did every monastery have its own dialect of silent cheese complaints? Or were they united by a shared medieval mime routine? You let the question drift unanswered, smiling at the image of monks waving their hands mid-meal like secret agents of daring diplomacy. The reader drones on, his voice like a lullaby. You let the words fade, hearing instead the rhythm of chewing, the scrape of knives on wooden plates, the sigh of someone swallowing slowly to savor their portion. It strikes you how deeply human this moment is. Silence meant for devotion, but hearts occupied by hunger and envy. You picture Brother Thomas shifting again, eyeing Andrew's slice, and you can almost hear the silent thought, Lord, grant me patience, but also cheese. The candles glow low, softening the harshness of stone. Shadows stretch tall, flickering as if they too are hungry. You rest your elbow on the table, chin heavy in your hand, and drift into the hypnotic rhythm. Silence has its own hum. It drowns out complaint, amplifies small movements, and turns a meal into meditation. But it also magnifies every injustice, every uneven cut knife, every extra crumb given to someone else. You swallow your last bite and realize that the silence lingers even after the food is gone. Bowls are collected, the scripture ends, and the monks rise, robes swishing softly. No words pass, no thanks spoken, no protests voiced. The whole drama of fairness, envy, and satisfaction plays out without a single sound. You step outside into the cloister, the night air cool on your face. The bells will soon call again, summoning the monks back to prayer. You take a deep breath, tasting faint salt on your lips, the memory of cheese still clinging to your tongue. Silence follows you like a second shadow, a reminder that in this world, even meals are as disciplined as the prayers that bookend them. The air carries a different weight as the calendar creeps toward a holy day. You sense at the moment you step into the cloister. The monks' movements are brisker, their eyes brighter, their voices, though still hushed, carry a note of anticipation. Tonight won't be an ordinary meal. Feast days bend the rules, stretch the rations, and most importantly, double the cheese. The mainstream fact settles before you like a platter on the table. Medieval monasteries celebrated over 100 feast days a year, honoring saints, holy events, and seasonal markers. These days allowed richer meals, breaking the monotony of fasting and moderation. Fish, wine, and yes, more generous wedges of cheese marked the occasion. For monks who lived most days in sparse repetition, feast days were a spark of joy, an edible reminder that holiness could taste good, too. You walk into the refectory and notice at once that the bowls are fuller. The bread loaves are larger, the broth thicker, and the cheese slices, oh yes, the cheese slices are twice as thick. Brother Oswald's usual frown softens for once, his lips twitching upward in what might almost be a smile. Even Brother Thomas seems distracted from his habitual envy, too busy chewing with delight to measure anyone else's portion. The quirky tidbit arrives in a burst of color. Records tell of abbeys decorating feast tables with carved cheese sculptures, wheels shaped into crosses, slices stacked into little towers, sometimes even small carvings of animals or symbols of the season. Imagine a solemn monk, knife in hand, frowning in concentration as he carves a tiny lamb out of cheddar. You nearly laugh aloud, but the thought is so endearing you simply let it warm you. Historians still argue whether these feasts undermine the very spirit of monastic discipline? Was doubling the cheese a reward for devotion? Or was it a slippery slope into indulgence? Did monks truly see it as spiritual celebration, or was it simply an excuse to eat heartier? The debates drift across centuries, unanswered, but tonight you decide not to overthink. You chew your own wedge, savoring the rare abundance. The reader recites a passage of scripture with extra vigor, his voice lifted just slightly higher than usual. Perhaps even he is buoyed by the feast day spirit. The monks chew and listen, their silence steady, but the air hums differently, less tense, more communal, like the quiet joy of a family gathering. You can almost imagine a novice sneaking an extra smile, though he hides it quickly behind his bowl. The flavors bloom brighter than usual. The cheese crumbles but also melts against your tongue, its richness surprising after so many thin portions. You close your eyes and let it linger, the way monks might linger over a hymn. Even the candles seem brighter tonight, their light dancing across the stone walls as though joining the celebration. You glance down the table and see something rare. Monks gesturing with their hands in silent thanks. A small bow to head, a shared glance of appreciation. For once, no one is glaring at anyone else's slice. For once, fairness feels easy, generosity abundant. As the meal draws to a close, you sit back, your stomach warm and full, your heart oddly lifted. The feast has done its work, not just in feeding bodies, but in softening envy, easing suspicion, reminding everyone that holiness could be shared joy. You can almost hear the walls sigh in relief. The tension that usually hangs in this hall, dissolved by the simple miracle of more cheese. The monks file out, quieter than ever, but their steps lighter, their robes swishing with a hint of rhythm. The bells will call again soon, summoning them back to prayer. But for now, you walk among them with a rare piece of fullness. Cheese has shifted tonight from source of envy to symbol of abundance, and you carry that glow into the cool night air. The night presses in colder, but you're drawn by the faint glow spilling from the kitchen. You slip inside quietly, and there they are, the youngest novices, their faces pale in the candlelight, their eyes darting nervously as they huddle near the pantry shelves. They whisper in voices thinner than parchment, each word trembling with the thrill of rebellion. They are about to do what no monk dares admit. Sneak cheese at midnight. The mainstream fact hums gently in your ear. Medieval monasteries demanded obedience, humility, and above all, discipline. Novices were trained from boyhood to endure hunger, silence, and routine. But human nature doesn't vanish with vows. The annals are filled with quiet accounts of small infractions. Pilfered figs, hidden crusts of bread, and yes, stolen curds of cheese. It wasn't open rebellion, just a tug of appetite outweighing the weight of rules. One novice, cheeks flushed, tiptoes forward. He reaches for Cellarer's wooden knife, hands trembling, and carves off the tiniest sliver from a wheel stacked on the shelf. The others gasp and giggle, their whispers chasing each other like mice. He stuffs it into his mouth, eyes closing in bliss. You grin despite yourself. His entire face is transformed by the miracle of forbidden dairy. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some abbeys actually wrote special penances for nocturnal nibbling. One record mentions a monk sentenced to copy psalms for weeks after sneaking food at night. Another was forced to fast for 3 days as punishment for eating cheese in secret. Imagine the irony. Stealing cheese only to be sentenced to less food. You can't help but laugh softly at the absurd fairness of it. Historians still argue whether these stories were exaggerated cautionary tales or genuine accounts of common behavior. Did monks really sneak around like schoolboys raiding the pantry? Or were these tales moral lessons designed to scare novices straight? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Hunger is persuasive, even in holy halls. You crouch lower, watching the novices whisper furiously, their eyes darting to the door at every creak. One nudges the other, mouthing too big, as another novice slices a piece dangerously thick. They all freeze when footsteps echo in the corridor. The cellarer passes by, lantern swinging, but the boys press themselves against the shelves, holding their breath, cheese crumbs clinging to their lips. The lantern glow fades, the footsteps vanish, and the novices exhale in unison. You imagine their pounding hearts, the thrill of risk, the sweet taste of stolen curds still melting on their tongues. You almost want to tell them you understand, That even holiness needs cracks, that rules bend easily under the weight of craving. But you say nothing, letting the silence hold their secret. The novices wipe their hands, straighten their robes, and slip out like shadows, leaving behind only a faint smell of dairy and a knife resting slightly out of place. The kitchen falls quiet again, the cheese wheels stacked in solemn rows, pretending nothing happened. You lean against a stone counter, eyelids heavy, and let the scene replay in your mind. The whispers, the crumbs, the nervous giggles. All so human, so ordinary, so fragile in this world of strict silence. It makes you realize that arguments about fairness don't just happen at the table. They linger in hunger, creep into midnight, and leave their traces in the tiniest stolen bite. The candles burn low. The air thickens with the smell of rinds and ashes. And as you step back into the cloister, you can almost hear the novices' laughter echoing faintly behind you, a reminder that even monks couldn't resist the pull of a midnight snack. The morning creeps in with pale light streaming through the high windows, and you notice a group of monks gathered in a corner of the cloister, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Brother Oswald rubs his temples, grimacing, while another brother presses something into his hand, a small wedge of soft cheese. You blink at the sight, medicine again, but this time for the mind rather than the stomach. The mainstream fact whispers to you. Medieval monks believed strongly in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Headaches, melancholy. Even what we call migraines were often treated through diet. Cheese, especially the softer, fresher kind, was thought to soothe the body, balance the humors, and bring calm to troubled heads. In abbey infirmaries, cheese might be recommended as readily as herbs or poultices. You watch Oswald nibble the wedge carefully, eyes squeezed shut. His brow relaxes slightly, though it's hard to tell if it's relief or just gratitude that someone notices pain. Around him, the monks murmur like concerned siblings. There's tenderness here. Strict rules softened by small acts of compassion. The quirky tidbit makes you stifle a laugh. One medical text suggested that placing cool curds directly against the temples could draw out the heat of a headache. Imagine Brother Thomas walking around the cloister with lumps of cheese strapped to his head like strange holy earmuffs. The thought makes your shoulders shake until you remember the silence rule. You cover your grin with your sleeve. Historians still argue whether such cures actually worked or were simply comforting placebos. Was the relief real, or was it the act of being cared for? Receiving food, attention, and prayer that ease the pain? You lean into the mystery, realizing that perhaps it doesn't matter. Healing, after all, is often half belief. The infirmarian shuffles in, his robe pockets bulging with herbs and dried roots, but he nods approvingly at the cheese. He adds a sprinkle of powdered sage, murmuring a prayer as he does. You inhale the scent, earthy, sharp, oddly soothing. The combination of dairy and herb feels both strange and inevitable, like a medieval recipe for comfort. You follow Oswald as he rests against a pillar, his eyes closing, the cheese sitting warm in his stomach. The other monks slip away to their duties, leaving him to breathe in the stillness. The bells toll faintly in the distance. Not urgent this time, more like a reminder that life flows on whether or not your head pounds. You sit near him, listening to the cloister's quiet. The rustle of pages in the library, the scratch of quills, the faint drip of water from a nearby fountain, all merge into a gentle rhythm. You almost forget the absurdity of cheese as medicine, because in this moment, you see its deeper meaning. It isn't just dairy. It's care, compassion, community wrapped in silence. Your eyelids droop as Oswald exhales one long, peaceful breath. You imagine the cool curds against his temples, the warmth of soft cheese in his stomach, the hum of prayers weaving around him. Perhaps the cure is not in the food, nor in the herb, nor in the rule, but in the way monks found kindness even in wedges of cheese. The week rolls forward, and the air in the abbey takes on a lively hum. For it is market day. You join a small procession of monks trundling carts out through the gatehouse, their sandals scuffing the dirt road as they steer wooden wheels heavy with cheese. The smell follows, earthy, tangy, sharp, strong enough to make heads turn even before the carts reach town. The mainstream fact comes alive. Monasteries were not only spiritual centers, but also economic hubs. They produced goods, ale, bread, honey, wool, and yes, cheese that sustained local communities and filled abbey coffers. Markets were crucial links between the cloister and the wider world. What was rationed so carefully inside the refectory could become currency outside its walls. A wheel of cheese was not just food. It was trade, diplomacy, and reputation rolled into one. You walk beside Brother Thomas, who grunts as he pulls his cart. He mutters about fairness even here, eyeing the portion of cheese assigned to each stall. Why do the fishmongers get 2 wheels while the ink seller gets only 1? He grumbles under his breath, though he knows silence is expected. His frown deepens, and you can tell he measures justice everywhere, even in commerce. The quirky tidbit tickles your imagination. Some records mention abbots gifting elaborately aged cheese wheels to bishops as tokens of respect. These weren't simple wedges. They were massive, ornately decorated, sometimes wrapped in embroidered cloth. You grin, imagining a bishop receiving such a wheel like a divine offering, while his servants struggled just to carry the thing through cathedral doors. Historians still argue whether monasteries dominated local markets unfairly, undercutting lay farmers with their well-trained labor and better resources. Were monks holy men sharing their goods, or savvy businessmen in robes? The debate lingers, and as you watch coins exchange hands in the market square, you realize the truth was likely both. The stalls brim with color, red apples piled high, dried fish strung neatly, baskets of herbs perfuming the air. The monk's cheese, though, draws the largest crowd. Housewives prod it with cautious fingers, merchants haggle, and children stare wide-eyed at the wheels taller than their heads. You chuckle quietly as one boy tugs at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the monks like they're legendary heroes delivering golden treasure. Brother Oswald lingers by the cart, arms crossed, suspicious as ever. He scans every transaction, as though ready to pounce if a merchant cuts too large a slice. His lips move silently, keeping tally like a human ledger. You wonder if he ever relaxes, or if fairness is the only hymn he truly sings. The sun warms your face, and the sounds of bartering swell around you. Laughter, shouts, clinking coins, all blend into a music far louder than the abbey bells. Yet beneath it all, cheese remains a star. You watch a fishmonger trade a basket of smoked trout for a hefty wheel, while another merchant offers ink and parchment in exchange for smaller wedges. Cheese buys food, tools, even books that will soon return to the scriptorium. As the day wanes, the monks pack up their carts, lighter now, the smell of cheese replaced by the faint metallic jingle of coins. They trudge back to the abbey, their sandals caked with dust, their robes heavy with the sweat of labor. And yet, there's pride in their steps, as if each wheel sold is not only a gain for the monastery, but a piece of their daily discipline transformed into sustenance for the world. You follow them back through the gatehouse, the door shutting with a familiar thud. The market noise fades behind you, replaced again by cloistered silence. The monks disperse, some to prayer, some to the library, some to the kitchen to tally what remains. And you, weary but smiling, realize in the world of monasteries, cheese is never just cheese. It is fairness, medicine, feast, temptation, and now economy itself. The abbey grows quiet again after market day, though the tension never vanishes for long. Tonight, the refectory fills with monks once more, bowls lined neatly in rows, bread placed with precision. You settle in among them, watching the cellarer make his careful rounds. Everything looks ordinary, until you notice the subtle glances, the stiff shoulders, the way Brother Matthew's lips tighten when his cheese slice is placed just a fraction thinner than his neighbor's. The mainstream fact slips into focus. Monasteries maintained strict rules of conduct, and punishment for infractions was a constant presence. But not every crime was grand. Many were small, almost petty, arriving late to prayers, speaking out of turn, sneaking food. Even something as simple as cheese theft could earn penance. The records are full of such punishments: extra prayers, fasting, kneeling in the cold chapel, or manual labor. The abbey had a system for everything, including the tiniest curd gone missing. You watch the tension mount at the table until, finally, the abbot raises his hand. His eyes narrow at the cellarer, then at the bowls. A silence even deeper than usual falls, thick as the stone walls. Then he speaks, soft, firm, accusing a brother of taking more than his portion. Heads turn slowly, eyes darting. Brother Thomas stiffens. Brother Andrew lowers his gaze. Brother Oswald, predictably, looks smug, as though vindicated at last. The quirky tidbit slips in here. In one abbey's record, a monk caught sneaking extra curds was ordered to recite the entire book of Psalms aloud. Every single verse. Imagine the monotony of 150 psalms spoken without pause, voice cracking, tongue numb, all because of a handful of cheese. You suppress a grin at the absurdity. It's punishment by holy audiobook, centuries before headphones existed. Historians still argue whether these punishments were genuinely enforced or merely listed as deterrents. Were monks really kneeling in cold chapels at midnight over stolen food, or were these warnings scribbled into rules to scare novices straight? The uncertainty lingers, but you know one thing. The fear was real enough to keep most in line. The accused monk shifts uncomfortably under the abbot's gaze. He opens his mouth to protest, but silence binds him. No defense allowed, only obedience. The abbot assigns a punishment. Extra psalms at dawn, a missed meal tomorrow. The monk bows his head, shoulders heavy, and accepts. Around you, the others chew slowly, perhaps relieved that their own suspicions remain hidden. You chew your own bread and cheese, the flavor dulled by the thick air of judgment. It tastes different when paired with punishment. Less like food, more like evidence. Every bite carries the weight of fairness, of suspicion, of discipline. Later, in the cloister, you glimpse the punished monk on his knees, lips moving in psalmic rhythm, the candlelight flickering against his tired face. You feel a pang of sympathy. Was the wedge truly stolen, or was it just cut a little thicker by accident? The rule allows no room for doubt, but your heart does. And as you watch, drowsy and swayed by the droning of whisper verses, you realize something. In this monastery, every crumb carries consequence. Cheese is not indulgence. It is law, fairness, temptation, and sometimes penance. The next day brings a shift in mood. The abbey guest house buzzes faintly with activity, its wooden beams echoing with footsteps that are heavier, richer, and far less silent than those of monks. Nobles have arrived. Travelers draped in bright cloaks, their boots polished, their servants bustling at their heels. You slip inside the hall, curious, and the first thing you notice is the table. It is not the austere refectory of the monks, but a long, richly set board, where cheese portions look nothing like the thin wedges you've seen before. The mainstream fact arrives clearly. Monasteries were obliged to offer hospitality not just to the poor and pilgrims, but also to wealthy guests. Noble patrons might donate land, money, or protection, and in return, they were welcomed with meals that often surpassed a monk's own. The contrast was striking. Where the brothers chewed silently on slivers, visiting lords and ladies might recline with generous cheese boards, wine, and roasted fish. The abbey's survival often depended on this generosity. You watch servants carry platters. Soft, creamy cheeses oozing onto wooden boards, firm wheels sliced thick, drizzled with herbs and honey. The nobles laugh and talk freely, their voices bouncing off the beams. You glance toward the corner, where Brother Oswald watches, arms crossed, lips pressed so thin they nearly disappear. His eyes flicker between the abundant trays and the memory of last night's punishments over a wedge. The quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some chronicles mention abbots who kept a secret stash of especially fine cheeses, gift from other abbeys or exotic imports, reserved only for noble guests. Imagine monks whispering about a wheel of Parmesan hidden away, never to be tasted by ordinary brothers. You almost laugh at the thought of a clandestine dairy vault, more guarded than relics of saints. Historians still argue whether this hospitality undermined the vow of equality. Did monks truly accept that nobles should eat better within abbey walls, or did resentment simmer beneath the surface? The record suggests both possibilities. Gratitude for the donations nobles brought, but also tension over the sight of abundance just beyond reach. You sit quietly at the edge, letting the sounds wash over you. The clink of cups, the low rumble of conversation, the burst of laughter. It feels like a different world compared to the monks' silent meals. You imagine the nobles praising the abbey's cheese, comparing it to that of rival monasteries, boasting about whose dairy was richer. It's medieval Yelp again, only this time with velvet sleeves and gold rings tapping against the table. Brother Thomas passes by with a tray, his step stiff, his eyes fixed on the ground. You can tell he resents serving food he will never taste, yet his obedience is unshaken. The Abbey's reputation, after all, rests on the satisfaction of its guests. If nobles leave happy, donations follow, and donations keep cheese wheels turning in the cellars. You take in the aromas, sharp, creamy, salty, sweet, so different from the modest tang you're used to. The nobles eat heartily, their fingers sticky with honey, their laughter spilling freely. And yet, you notice the monks in the shadows, their gazes darting but never lingering too long, each one wrestling with thoughts of fairness, humility, and hunger. The bells toll faintly outside, a reminder that time does not pause for feasts. The nobles barely notice, but the monks stiffen, crossing themselves, whispering prayers before returning to service. You watch them disappear into cloister, their sandals slapping softly against stone, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and the smell of feasting. You lean back, the contrast weighing heavy. In this abbey, cheese is never neutral. To some, it is medicine. To others, penance. To nobles, it is luxury. And to monks, it remains ration rule and quiet resentment. The guest house grows quiet again once the nobles depart, but their laughter and the scent of rich cheese linger in the halls like perfume that clings too long. You drift back into the kitchen where the cellarer bends over a half-cut wheel, frowning at a strange green bloom spreading across its surface. The novices gather around, whispering, their faces caught between awe and disgust. The great debate of the evening is not about fairness this time. It is about mold. The mainstream fact unfolds neatly. Cheese in the Middle Ages was often stored in damp cellars, where molds naturally grew. Sometimes the mold was harmless, even flavorful, while other times it signaled decay. Monks had to decide whether spots of blue or green were gifts from nature or warnings from God. Without modern science, they leaned on observation, tradition, and the occasional prayer. You lean closer, catching the earthy tang of the rind. The cellarer slices a thin piece, examining the mottled edge. The novices crane their necks, whispering guesses. One insists it is holy preservation, a sign the cheese will keep longer. Another swears it's dangerous rot, a test from the devil himself. You smirk, sensing how a simple spot of mold has turned into theological speculation. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some monasteries reportedly treated moldy cheese as medicinal, scraping off the fuzzy bits and mixing them into poultices for wounds. Imagine that, smearing moldy curds onto cuts with the faith it might heal. You nearly laugh, picturing Brother Thomas reluctantly offering his infected toe while Brother Matthew pats on a pace of dubious dairy. Historians still argue whether monks recognized mold as useful or whether they simply tolerated it because food was scarce. Did they view blue veins as delicacy, like later Roquefort, or as contamination barely disguised by piety? The records blur between praise and warning, leaving modern scholars unsure if monks dined happily on early blue cheese or avoided it whenever possible. The cellarer clears his throat, holds up the wheel, and declares that it is safe. The novices nod, though one pinches his nose dramatically. You can't help but grin. The theater of mold inspection looks like a tiny courtroom, with cheese on trial and monks as jury. The verdict for now is edible. You trail them back to the refectory. Tonight's slices come with faint green freckles, and you notice how carefully each monk examines his portion before taking a bite. Brother Oswald squints suspiciously, muttering under his breath, though he eats it anyway, unwilling to forfeit fairness even in mold. The silence during the meal feels heavier than usual, flavored with unease. Every crunch, every swallow seems slower, more deliberate. The scripture reading goes on, words of purity and cleansing ironically set against the taste of spotted curds. You smirk into your sleeve, wondering if the reader, too, notices the irony. When the meal ends, the monks file out quietly, but you catch faint murmurs afterward in the cloister. Some claim the mold tasted rich, savory, even divine. Others whisper of stomach cramps and bad omens. The abbey itself feels divided, like two orders under one roof. Those who trust the mold and those who fear it. The candles flicker low, the shadows stretch long, and you linger in the refectory, staring at the half-empty wheel on the steward's table. The green freckles glow faintly in the dim light, mysterious, unsettling, oddly beautiful. You sigh, letting the quiet wrap around you, and think to yourself, even mold has the power to stir debates as fierce as any sermon. The days turn damp, rain dripping steadily from the cloister gutters, and you notice the unease spreading to the abbey like mildew on stone. Down in the cellars, the air feels heavier, wetter, and the wheels of cheese sweat faintly under the touch. You trail behind the cellarer as he mutters to himself, lanterns swinging, each step echoing against the moist walls. The monks may argue over fairness, but tonight their worry is larger. The weather itself threatens their stores. The mainstream fact is clear. Cheese, like all preserved foods in the Middle Ages, was vulnerable to climate. A hot summer could spoil entire batches. A damp season could rot the rinds, and a harsh winter might crack the wheels beyond saving. Monasteries depended on stable storage, but nature was fickle. You picture the cellarer recording losses in a trembling hand, his numbers shrinking with every spoil wheel. You inhale, the scent of souring dairy thick in your throat. The novices shuffle nervously, watching as the cellarer taps wheels with his knuckles. A dull sound means rot inside. He grimaces. Too many dull sounds tonight. His lips tighten as he counts. 1, 2, 3 ruined wheels. Enough to turn next week's rations into whispers of hunger. The quirky tidbit softens the gloom. Some abbeys tried strange tricks to protect cheese from the weather. A record describes wheels coated in herbs, ashes, or even wrapped in nettles to ward off dampness. Imagine monks smearing ash over cheese like sunscreen, muttering prayers that smoke and stings might keep decay at bay. You chuckle, though the cellarer here does not. His worry is too real. Historians still argue whether medieval abbeys truly mastered cheese preservation, or whether luck played the greater role. Did techniques passed down carefully, or was each season a gamble, a roll of the weather's dice? The debate lingers like mist over the cloister gardens, unresolved. You watch Brother Oswald scowl as another cracked wheel is revealed. His sense of fairness is wounded deeper than usual. How can rations be equal when the weather itself cheats them? He mutters, God tests us, though his eyes dart accusingly at the cellarer, as if human hands could command the skies. The monks gather in the refectory later, their bowls lighter than before. The slices of cheese are thinner, the edges crumbly, damp creeping into every bite. Silence stretches longer, heavier, almost resentful. The reader drones through scripture, but his voice falters when a novice coughs, gagging at the sour taste. You smirk softly. It's not funny, but the face he makes is almost comic. Still, no one dares laugh aloud. After the meal, you wander the cloister and listen to the whispers. The rains will ruin us. The cellars are too wet. We must pray harder. The abbey seems cloaked not just in mist, but in dread. And yet, you also sense resolve. Tomorrow they will scrub the shelves, sprinkle herbs, shift the wheels to higher ground. The fight against weather is endless, but it is fought nonetheless, with prayers, herbs, and weary hands. You pause under an archway, rain dripping rhythmically into the stone basin at your side. The sound blends with the echo of the monks' sandals as they shuffle back to the chapel. You close your eyes, breathing in the damp, feeling the abbey's pulse. Even here, even in fear, there is rhythm. The bells will toll again. The monks will pray. The cheese will either hold or crumble. And life, measured slice by slice, will go on. The rains ease after days of steady drizzle, and the abbey opens its gates once more. You hear the shuffle of tired feet on the road, the low murmur of voices, the occasional cough or burst of laughter. Pilgrims are arriving again, their cloaks streaked with mud, their staffs worn smooth from miles of walking. You trail them into the courtyard, where the porter greets each with a nod and a blessing, ushering them toward the guest house. And as before, hospitality here means bread, broth, and, yes, cheese. The mainstream fact comes into focus. Pilgrims in the Middle Ages traveled not only to famous shrines like Santiago or Canterbury, but also from abbey to abbey, relying on the hospitality of monastic houses along the way. They often compared notes about which abbeys were generous and which were stingy. To a weary traveler, the size of a cheese wedge could feel like a sign of divine favor or neglect. You sit among them as the trays arrive. The bread is rough, the broth thin, but the cheese is portioned with ritual care. One slice each, no more, no less. Yet you hear the whispers almost instantly. At St. Albans, the wedge was thicker. At Cluny, they gave us 2. Here, it's fine, but the rind's a bit too hard. You chuckle quietly. It's like medieval Yelp reviews, whispered across wooden tables in between prayers. The quirky tidbit makes you grin wider. Some chronicles mention travelers actually ranking monasteries by food, keeping informal pilgrim guides in memory or song. One even joked that the surest sign of holiness was whether the abbey's cheese was edible. You imagine a group of dusty pilgrims humming tunes about cheddar, praising one abbey while warning others. Avoid the house by the river. Their cheese tastes like rainwater. Historians still argue whether these comparisons influence abbey reputations in serious ways, or whether they were just harmless chatter among travelers. Did word of stingy portions really discourage future pilgrims? Or did piety outweigh the lure of daily generosity? The debate lingers. But sitting here, you can feel how much these small acts of hospitality mattered. The monks serve silently, their expressions neutral, though you suspect their ears catch every whisper. Brother Oswald, of course, hovers nearby, arms folded. His brow furrows deeper with every comparison. To him, fairness must be preserved within, and now he bristles at strangers judging the abbey's generosity. He mutters under his breath, perhaps silently defending his house. We give what we can. No more, no less. The pilgrims, though, are delighted enough. Their faces brighten as they eat, shoulders relaxing as hunger fades. They laugh more freely than the monks ever do, voices echoing against stone walls. For them, this wedge is grace incarnate, not only filling their stomachs, but proving that God provides through human hands. You watch one family share their portions, parents giving extra crumbs to children, their eyes shining with gratitude. The sight warms you more than the broth. For all the debates and jealousies, cheese here becomes communion, a bridge between cloister and road, between monk and wanderer. Later, as the guests prepare to sleep, you linger in the cloister and hear their voices fading into night. Some hum hymns, some whisper prayers, some joke again about which abbey's cheese was best. You smile, realizing that long after the taste is gone, the memory of hospitality lingers. The abbey has been weighed, judged, and, at least tonight, found generous enough. You tilt your head back. The stars faint above the cloister arches. The air cool after rain. The bells will call soon as always. But for now, you let yourself rest in the quiet. Cheese has been measured, compared, and even gossiped about. But beneath it all lies something steadier. A promise that no pilgrim leaves hungry, and that even a sliver can taste like blessing. The dawn breaks pale and thin, mist curling around the cloister, like was spun from clouds. You wander into the refectory once more, but today the air feels different. The monks gather quietly, and as the bowls are set out, you notice a pattern emerging. Not all slices are cut alike. Some wedges rest thick and generous, others paper-thin, almost mean in their smallness. The hierarchy of cheese has made itself visible. The mainstream fact stands firm. Monastic life was structured by rank. The abbot held authority. The cellarer managed stores. The choir monks prayed and copied texts, and the novices obeyed in silence. Even in meals, subtle hierarchies appeared, though rules stressed equality. In practice, abbots and high-ranking officials often enjoyed slightly better portions. It was unspoken, but everyone knew. You glanced toward the abbot at the head of the table. His slice, while not ostentatious, is undeniably larger than the rest. A novice down the road nibbles a sliver barely the size of his fingernail. The silence of the meal seems heavier, charged with the knowledge that fairness bends beneath the weight of hierarchy. The quirky tidbit slips in. In some abbeys, novices were given rinds, tough, chewy, sometimes moldy edges of wheels, while senior monks took the soft hearts. Imagine being told the rind itself was a lesson in humility. You almost chuckle, picturing a novice gnawing miserably on a leathery edge while sneaking glances at the abbot savoring creamy curds. It's medieval hazing, wrapped politely in vows of obedience. Historians still argue whether this inequality was institutionalized or simply tolerated as an unspoken custom. Did abbots truly justify larger portions, or did stewards quietly slip them extra out of deference? Was it accepted without question, or did silent resentment simmer under the habit's folds? You sense both possibilities lingering in the air like incense. Brother Oswald, unsurprisingly, sits rigid, his eyes sharp as knives. He notices everything. His gaze flickers from novice to abbot, tallying silently, lips pressing thinner with every bite. You imagine his thoughts thundering. Justice is blind, but cheese portions are not. He chews slowly, deliberately, as though to remind himself that patience itself is a kind of protest. The scripture reader drones on about humility, about the first being last and the last being first. The irony hangs heavy over the hall, and you can't help smirking into your sleeve. The novices gnaw their rinds dutifully. The abbot enjoys his wedge with solemn dignity, and the rest of the brothers pretend not to notice the imbalance that everyone sees. You chew your own slice, somewhere in the middle. Neither abbot's abundance nor novice's austerity. It tastes faintly bitter tonight, not because of the cheese itself, but because of the silence stretched tight around it. The refectory is a theater of obedience, and cheese is the stage where rank reveals itself most plainly. When the meal ends, the bowls are collected, the candles gutter low, and the monks file out as always. Yet you can feel the weight that lingers. The novices shuffle slower, their stomachs unsatisfied. The abbot strides with calm authority, his hunger appeased, and Oswald follows, eyes still burning, as if the ledger in his mind will never balance. You step into the cloister, the mist still thick, the bell's about to toll again. Hierarchy hums in every sound, the deep clang for the abbot, the faint echo for novices, the same rhythm that divides slices on the table. You sigh, realizing that here, even silence has rank, and cheese is not only nourishment but mirror power. The seasons shift, and with them, the monastery's rhythm of fasting begins. You wake to the sound of bells that toll longer than usual, their echoes solemn, sinking into the stone. Tonight's meal feels stark before it even arrives. The bowls come out thinner, the bread smaller, and the cheese almost non-existent. What once was a steady wedge is now a shaving, more symbolic than sustaining. The mainstream fact takes shape. Medieval monastic life revolved around cycles of fasting, particularly during Lent, Advent, and on countless saints' vigils. Food was pared back drastically, sometimes excluding meat, eggs, or dairy altogether. Cheese was often a contested item, whether it counted as animal food or could be permitted under certain exceptions. Many abbeys banned it outright during fasting, though others allowed tiny portions to sustain the weakest brothers. You lift the shaving of cheese with your fingers. It is so thin you can see the cracks that would grain through it when you hold it against the table. You chew anyway, the faint tang evaporating before you even swallow. Hunger hums louder than scripture tonight. The quirky tidbit tiptoes in. A few abbeys permitted cheese substitutes during fasting. Curds made from almond milk or peas, pressed and salted to mimic dairy. Imagine a monk proudly presenting his pea curd experiment, while the others grimace politely. Chewing lumps that taste more of earth than of comfort. You nearly laugh out loud, but stifle it, knowing Brother Oswald would never forgive such irreverence. Historians still argue whether fasting rules were strictly enforced or quietly bent in daily practice. Did abbots truly forbid cheese entirely? Or did cellarers sneak small portions to brothers who labor hardest? Were exceptions granted out of compassion? Or were they whispered indulgences no one recorded? The ambiguity leaves you picturing monks walking a fine line between holiness and hunger. The silence during this meal feels different. More resigned, more prayerful, yet also tinged with yearning. The reader recites verses about discipline, the body as vessel, the soul needing less than it craves. Each word seems aimed at the rumbling in your stomach. A novice shifts in his seat, eyes darting to the almost empty platters. His hands fold tighter in his lap, but the yearning is written on his face. You chew bread slowly, savoring even its roughness. Hunger sharpens every sense. The crackle of candles, the sigh of robes against benches, the faint scrape of wooden spoons in nearly empty bowls. Fairness is no longer measured in portion size, but in endurance, whether every brother can withstand the same trial without breaking. Later, in the cloister, you overhear whispered prayers in the dark. Grant me strength, Lord. Grant me patience. The words hang heavy, mingling with the faint scent of cold wax and damp stone. No one speaks of cheese directly, but the absence of it looms larger than any portion ever did. You wrap your robe tighter, hunger gnawing at your ribs, and glance up at the night sky. Stars prick the darkness like crumbs scattered across a black cloth. The bells will toll again before dawn, calling the monks to prayer on empty stomachs. And as you close your eyes against the chill, you realize this too is part of the story. Not the abundance of cheese, nor the envy of portions, but the hollow discipline of its absence. The fast wears on, thinning not only the meals, but also the monk's patience. You notice in the way Brother Thomas's jaw clenches more often, in the way novices shuffle with heavy steps, and in the faint sharpness creeping even into silent glances. Hunger has a way of magnifying everything. When the cellarer finally enters a refectory with a tray tonight, the air almost vibrates with anticipation. The mainstream fact slips in. During extended fasts, monasteries often issued exceptions to the elderly, the infirm, or those engaged in heavy labor. A faint allowance of cheese, just enough to keep a man upright, was sometimes granted under the rule. But allowances bred suspicion. Who deserved the extra bite? Who received unfair favor? Fairness became a battlefield again, sharpened by empty bellies. You watch carefully as the cellarer moves down the table. To one older brother, he slips a slightly thicker slice. To another, frail and coughing, he lays down a portion while whispering a quiet blessing. The rest of the monks lower their eyes, but their ears sharpen, their shoulders tense. It is impossible not to notice when another's wedge is larger than your own, especially when your stomach twists with want. The quirky tidbit surfaces like a guilty smile. In some abbey, special dispensation tokens were issued during fasts, little wooden markers carved with symbols, redeemable for an extra serving of cheese or milk. Picture a medieval coupon system, whispered through hallways and guarded like treasure. You chuckle softly, imagining monks trading tokens like school children swapping lunch snacks. Historians still argue whether such allowances undermine the spirit of fasting. Was compassion for the weak an act of charity or a crack in discipline? Did special tokens create resentment more than relief? The arguments circle endlessly, as though fairness itself could never be wholly settled. Brother Oswald, unsurprisingly, stiffens at the sight of extra slices. His eyes burn as he watches the cellarer pass, and you almost hear his silent calculations. That wedge was thicker by a thumb's width. That blessing came with favoritism. That token should have been mine. He'd choose his own meager portion with exaggerated slowness, as though proving to everyone that fairness must be upheld even through hunger. The reader's voice rises, reciting verses about charity, about feeding the poor and the weak. The irony drips like candle wax, unspoken but heavy. You smirk behind your sleeve, wondering if the reader chose that passage intentionally, or fate simply enjoys a joke. You chew bread more slowly, stretching across minutes, letting each crumb dissolve like it matters. Hunger has turned every bite into theater, every swallow into performance. Around you, the silence quivers with equal parts piety and envy. After the meal, the novices whisper in the cloister, "Did you see? He had more. It was thicker, I swear it." Their voices flutter like moths in the dark, harmless but restless. The abbey hums with quiet tension, stretched thinner than the portions themselves. You stand in the archway, the night pressing cool against your face, and realize something new. Fairness is never static here. It bends with fasting, flexes with exceptions, warps under hunger. What was once a steady rhythm of wedges and bowls now feels like a contest of survival, disguised in holy silence. You sigh, pulling your robe close, listening to the echo of sandals against stone. The bells will toll again, calling the monks back to prayer on stomachs half empty, hearts half satisfied. And yet you think, perhaps that was always the point, not to end hunger, but to wrestle with it, slice by slice. The fast drags deeper into the season, and the air itself feels lighter, as though the abbey walls are thinned under so much restraint. You follow the monks into the refectory once again, but tonight there's a subtle shift. On the abbot's order, fairness itself is to be tested. Each brother will weigh his slice. The mainstream fact slides in. Medieval monasteries were meticulous with measures. Grain, ale, bread, and cheese were often weighed or counted to ensure order. Ledgers recorded not only what was stored, but what was consumed. Precision was seen as both economic prudence and spiritual discipline. In some abbeys, scales sat permanently in the refectory as tools of fairness. The cellarer places a small set of brass scales on a high table, their pans gleaming in the candlelight. One by one, slices are cut, set on the scale, and weighed to the ounce. The monks lean forward, eyes sharp, breaths held. The silence is no longer just ritual. It is expectation. Tension wounds so tightly it hums in the bones. The quirky tidbit slips in like a grin. Some chronicles mention scales being blessed, sprinkled with holy water, as though sanctifying the fairness itself. Imagine monks treating cheese weighing like a liturgy, chanting psalms while the pans tip delicately. You can't help but smirk at the vision. Holiness measured by grams of curd. Historians still argue whether these weighing rituals brought real peace or simply highlighted inequality even more. Did the scales silence complaints, or did it sharpen envy by turning fairness into visible numbers? You watch tonight, and the answer feels clear enough. Every monk leans in, not trusting fate alone, but metal pans to prove justice. Brother Thomas receives a slice, sees it laid on the scale, and nods gravely when it balances. Brother Andrew next frowns when his piece dips just slightly lighter. His lips tighten, but he swallows his protest, chewing with the dignity of a man wronged by fractions. And Brother Oswald. Oh, Brother Oswald. His eyes gleam with victory, for the scale confirms everything he has muttered for years. Fairness can be proven, weighed, and demanded. You take your own portion, setting it on the pan before eating. The weight clinks softly, precise, undeniable. Yet as you chew, you realize something. The slice tastes no different, whether heavier or lighter by an ounce. Hunger doesn't care for fairness, only for fullness. But the abbey has turned cheese into a science of justice. Each crumb a measure of equality. After the meal, the scales are wiped clean and carried out reverently, as though they are relics themselves. The monks file into the cloister, their steps slower, their stomachs no fuller than before. Yet the air hums differently. Some satisfied, some suspicious, all bound together by the shared ritual of weighing what cannot truly be equal. You walk beneath the arches, the moon pale above, and think about the balance. Brass pans, thin wedges, silent stares. It is all theater, yet theater with meaning. Fairness has been staged tonight, played out with scales and silence. And though hunger lingers, the abbey breathes easier, convinced, at least for now, that justice has been done. The next evening dawns with less ceremony, yet the air feels heavier still. The scales may have satisfied some brothers, but envy does not vanish so easily. You settle into the refectory and notice Brother Thomas glancing at the platter long before it reaches him. His shoulders tighten, his fingers drum against the table, and when his slice is finally set down, his lips purse into the faintest scowl. The wedge in his eyes is too small. The mainstream fact unfolds. Disputes over food rations in monasteries occasionally made it into formal records. Not every abbey was serene. Quarrels erupted over bread, ale, or dairy. Discipline demanded silence at meals. But afterward, grievances sometimes spilled into whispered complaints or even formal petitions to the abbot. Cheese wedges, humble as they were, could ignite more unrest than sermons. You followed Thomas into the cloister after supper. The candles burn low. The arches echo with quiet footsteps, and still his mutters break the silence. Not fair. Never fair. He corners Brother Andrew, accusing him of sly glances and extra crumbs. Andrew raises his hands in protest, shaking his head. But the bitterness is already planted. What was once silent envy has become open discord. Here's the quirky tidbit. One medieval chronicle recorded a monk fined not in prayer or fasting, but in actual cheese. His punishment was to surrender his entire week's ration to the brother he had accused falsely. Imagine the sting, both hunger and humiliation, delivered wedge by wedge. You smirk at the thought, half horrified, half amused. Historians still argue whether these disputes reflected genuine scarcity or just the pettiness of men bound too tightly by rules. Was Thomas hungry beyond reason, or simply addicted to grievance? Was Andrew truly favored, or just unlucky to sit under Thomas's gaze? The truth, as always, lingers somewhere between parchment and rumor. The argument simmers as other monks pass, pretending not to hear. Silence is a rule, but silence cannot erase tension. Brother Oswald appears at the edge of the cloister, his eyes glinting like cold iron. He doesn't speak, but his presence alone chills the space. He has no patience for grievances that disrupt order, and you imagine him tallying sins like coins, waiting for justice to balance. The night stretches long, and you wander the fountain in the courtyard. Its trickle feels louder than the whispers still buzzing behind the cloister walls. The air smells faintly of smoke from the kitchen hearth, carrying with it the ghost of cheese melted into broth. Even outside the refectory, its shadow clings. You close your eyes, listening to sandals scrape stone, to the murmurs of tired voices fading into prayer. The abbey hums with tension, though outwardly serene. Tomorrow, psalms will be sung as always. Cheese will be sliced as always, and hunger will gnaw as always. Yet fairness will remain unsettled, like an itch beneath a robe. Quiet, persistent, never wholly healed. You wake to a hush so complete it feels almost theatrical, as the abbey itself is holding its breath. Word has drifted through the cloister like incense. Someone told a story in the guest house last night, the kind of story that lifts stomachs as surely as it lifts spirits. Not bookkeeping, not fairness, not mold. This one is about abundance, about a wheel that did not end when logic said it should. You follow the scent of warm bread to the kitchen and find a cluster of brothers trading whispers like contraband. The phrase you hear again and again is simple, childlike, irrepressible. The cheese multiplied. The mainstream fact gives shape to the wonder. Medieval Europe teems with miracle tales, many attached to shrines, saintly relics, or monastic houses. Food miracles are familiar genre. Loaves multiplied in famine, barrels of ale that never ran dry, granaries that refilled mysteriously after almsgiving. In such stories, divine generosity meets human need right at the table. Monasteries, always balancing scarcity with hospitality. Love these tales the way a parched throat loves water. If a saint could stretch a loaf, perhaps he could stretch a wheel as well. You edge closer to the kitchen hearth, where a traveling brother from a neighboring priory recounts the scene. A harsh winter, a tide of pilgrims, stores running low, anxiety curdling like milk left on a warm sill. The cellarer, gray with worry, cut a wheel thinner and thinner until the knife felt like blasphemy. And then, here the storyteller lowers his voice. The slices kept coming. Each cut revealed more cheese, not less, like a wheel with a secret heart. The pilgrims ate, the brothers ate, the servants ate, and still the rind rose as if replenished by invisible hands. You want to be cynical, but the kitchen steam and the monk's wide eyes make doubt feel rude. Someone cracks a smile, another crosses himself. A novice clutches a story like a warm bowl against his ribs. Even Brother Oswald, master of fairness and frowns, lingers by the doorway. He's not nodding, but he isn't leaving either, which, in Oswald language, means interest. The quirky tidbit peeks out like a mouse behind a sack of grain. A few medieval marginalia show doodles of wheels sprouting little rays, almost like halos, hovering over tables where monks and beggars mingle. It's hard to know if the drawings celebrate a specific miracle or just a general wish. Cheese as sun, table as earth, charity as gravity. You can't help but grin at the image. The holiest UFO is a gently glowing Gouda. You drift with the brothers to the refectory where the story continues to bloom, past mouth to ear, each retelling smoothing the edges like palms on prayer bead. You take your seat, hands folded, pretending you're immune to myth. But when the cellar arrives with today's wheel, you feel the entire hall lean forward, subtle as a tide. The knife gleams. He cuts. The slices look ordinary. The wheel shrinks, as wheels do. Reality plods on, unconcerned with rumor. And yet, something happens anyway. Not a miracle of matter, but a miracle of mood. The portion set in your bowl carries a rumor with it. Tastes warmer than yesterday's equal ounce. Faith does that, seasoning food with meaning until it feeds more than the gut. Even the silence feels kinder, less like a gag and more like a shawl. A monk, too, places down nudges a crumb toward a novice. The novice slides a corner back. A tiny barter of kindness, small but unmistakable. Historians still argue whether such tales belong to pious propaganda or lived experience. Were they told to encourage almsgiving, to justify generosity that arithmetic could not? Or did something genuinely uncanny occur on a night of tight belts and wider prayers? The debate has the usual footnotes, but no one can footnote the look on a hungry face when hope is served warm. You chew slowly and let the narrative do its quiet work. Miracles are a kind of ambient sound, like the fan you turn on back home, or the rain you listened to last week in this cloister. You don't always notice them. Sometimes you only sleep better because they're there. 3 light jokes float through your mind uninvited. First, if the cheese truly multiplied, the cellarer might finally relax his shoulders, unlikely. Second, Brother Oswald might start weighing hope on the scales just to be sure he would try. Third, if miracles respond to need, best not tell nobles in the guest house, or the universe will take one look at their cheese board and say, "You're fine." After the meal, the abbot permits a rare sliver of speech. He says only this: if generosity were measured, we would weigh our hearts. It is not much, but in a house where slices are counted by the ounce, the sentence lands like a bell struck at the right moment. You watch the brothers inhale as one, then exhale slowly, as if that single line topped off an empty barrel. You wander the cellar again, unable to resist a glance at tonight's wheel. It sits there without glow, obedient to physics, humming only with the cellar's damp. You lay a palm on the rind. It is cool, faintly gritty, smelling of grass and patience. You know it won't multiply for your hand, and still you whisper a thank you to it, as if it could hear. Gratitude doesn't need a miracle. It builds its own. A novice slips in behind you, eyes bright. He confesses, still within the bounds of permitted murmur, that the story made him less afraid of hunger. If it happened once, he says, then, even if it never happens again, I can borrow the memory of it. You nod, because that's how memory works in places like this. The past doesn't end. It lends. A tale is a second pantry, and some nights the door swings open. When you return to the cloister walk, you notice how the arches seem taller, the shadows softer. No extra cheese has appeared on the table, and yet the community walks a fraction lighter, as though the rumor has filled a lack that rations could not. You catch Brother Oswald measuring the sky with his eyes, as if fairness, too, might multiply when watched closely. And you almost laugh. If he starts auditing miracles, you will need a second ledger. You pause at the fountain, listening to the water thread its way from lip to bowl to stone. You remember the fast, the mold debates, the scales, the penalties, how heavy all of it can feel. Then you remember the tale of the replenished wheel, and even if every historian on earth voted unlikely, your stomach would still unclench a notch. That is the odd power of these old stories. They feed you whether or not they happen, and on thin days, that is not nothing. The bells murmur Compline into the dusk. You follow the brothers toward prayer, feet soft on the flags, the night air tasting faintly of herbs from the kitchen. You don't ask the heavens for multiplying wheels. You ask for something smaller and maybe harder, that when the knife comes down tomorrow, hands stay steady, eyes stay kind, and envy sits a seat farther away. If a miracle wants to come, it knows the address. If not, you will still eat, and you will still give thanks, and you will still tell the story in a voice so gentle it might, for a moment, make the cheese taste more than it is. The abbey quiets again after the miracle tale, but beneath the silence runs a new current curiosity. The brothers may never admit aloud, yet you see the glances, the sideways tilt of the head, the faintest twitch of lips. If cheese could multiply in a story, what else might it do? Tonight, the refectory hums with a different kind of tension. Less envy, more suspicion. And suspicion in this house quickly grows into an inquiry. The mainstream fact folds itself in. Medieval monasteries operated under the rule of St. Benedict, which emphasized accountability. Monks accused of infractions face investigations. Sometimes quiet inquiries by the abbot, other times formal confessions in chapter meetings. Even the smallest matters, like a misplaced crumb, could be dragged into scrutiny. Justice was not swift anger, but slow, deliberate examination. You sit at the long table, candlelight flickering against bare stone. The cheese slices tonight are modest, though not as meager as during the fast. You lift yours carefully, but already you feel eyes. Brother Thomas chews too quickly. Brother Andrew keeps glancing at his neighbor's portion, and Brother Oswald, predictably, hovers like a hawk. His gaze sharpens and narrows, and finally his hand lifts, signaling for attention. He suspects foul play. The quirky tidbit breaks attention like a squeaky bench. Some abbeys actually held trial meals, where suspected unfairness was reenacted with weighed portions in front of witnesses. Imagine a medieval courtroom, except the evidence is a cheese wedge placed solemnly on the scale. You almost chuckle aloud at the thought of monks cross-examining Kurds as though they might confess. Historians still argue whether these trials were meant to uncover truth or simply to reaffirm authority. Were monks genuinely guilty of stealing slices, or were these rituals designed to remind everyone that fairness was always under surveillance? The ambiguity lingers like candle smoke, thick, bitter, impossible to clear. The abbot raises his hand, and silence sharpens into stillness. A novice is accused, his slice deemed suspiciously thicker. He protests with wide eyes, but words are forbidden at meals. The cellarer is summoned, scales fetched. The wedge is weighed. It tips heavy. Gasps ripple through the hall, though muted by vows of silence. Brother Oswald looks vindicated, his lips curving upward in grim satisfaction. You watch the novice's face pale, his shoulders slump. It may have been error, not theft, a knife cut wrong, a portion uneven, but fairness does not leave room for accidents. The punishment is announced. Tomorrow, the novice eats only bread, no cheese. A day of correction, a day to learn that fairness bites hardest when you think least about it. The hall returns to its meal, but the air is taut. Every slice is now an accusation waiting to happen. You chew slowly, each mouthful thick with unease. Cheese no longer tastes of comfort. It tastes of trial, of suspicion, of justice pressed into curd. Later, in the cloister, the novice kneels in the shadows, whispering prayers. His hands tremble as he fingers his rosary. Was the slice truly too thick, or was the knife simply careless? You cannot know. Perhaps no one can. But fairness has been weighed, judged, and enforced. And in the silence of this abbey, judgment always outweighs mercy. You walk the arches, hearing the fountain drip, smelling the faint sourness of old rinds from the kitchen. Justice feels heavy here, heavier than the scales themselves. You sigh and let the night carry you, realizing that in this world, even cheese can put a man on trial. The abbey bells toll again, not for prayer this time, but for gathering. You drift with the brothers into the chapter house, that stone chamber where discipline is spoken aloud. Normally, infractions are read, penances assigned, confessions made. But today, something new simmers in the air. The abbot's voice rises above the hush. Fairness itself will be debated openly, and the subject, once again, is cheese. The mainstream fact takes its place. Monastic communities held chapter meetings daily, often after prime. It was here that monks confessed faults, abbots judged, and rules were interpreted. The chapter house was both courtroom and parliament, where even small matters, lateness, silence, broken food portions, could be discussed. In theory, every monk had a voice, though in practice, hierarchy weighed heavily. You watch as Brother Oswald clears his throat, his voice rasping but sharp. He argues that the weighing of wedges must become permanent, not occasional. Scales at every meal, ledgers kept, fairness measured to the crumb. Brother Thomas, predictably, nods with fervor, but others shift uneasily, their eyes lowering. Silence is discipline, but today, exceptions are allowed. The quirky tidbit winks in. One medieval abbey record describes an entire chapter meeting consumed by a debate over whether cheese should be sliced radially like a pie or cut straight across into planks. Hours of holy men discussing geometry, all to ensure fairness. You nearly laugh aloud. imagining Oswald drawing diagrams in the dust like a monkish Euclid of Derry. Historians still argue whether these disputes reflect genuine crisis or simply the human need to argue within tight rules. Was fairness truly imperiled by slicing techniques? Or did monks seize cheese as a safe battlefield, easier than confronting deeper grievances? The debate persists, and you feel its echo in the chapter house tonight. A young novice, braver than most, raises his hand. He suggests that fairness might not always be about equal weight, but about equal spirit. That some brothers labor harder, some fall ill, and maybe their slices should bend in need. A murmur ripples through the chamber, half shock, half approval. Brother Oswald's face reddens like a wheel left too long in the sun. To him, this smells of heresy against fairness itself. The abbot listens, fingers steepled, eyes calm but sharp. His silence is heavier than any speech. You realize the weight of this room is not in its stones, but in its rules. To argue here is to risk penance, but also to risk change. Finally, the abbot speaks. His verdict is subtle, measured. Scales will remain, but mercy may guide them. The rule is order, but charity is its soul. Some wedges will bend in need, but records will still be kept. Oswald's jaw tightens, but he bows. The novice exhales with relief, though he knows mercy often hides punishment behind it. You leave the chapter house with the brothers, the air thick with both victory and tension. Some faces glow with hope, others darken with suspicion. Fairness has been redefined tonight, balanced precariously between order and compassion. The cloister feels heavier afterward, the arches pressing low, the fountain's drip echoing louder than usual. You pace slowly, robe brushing stone, and think about what you've seen. Cheese has become philosophy, discipline, even geometry. What began as rations has turned into rhetoric, debated like scripture itself. And as the bells toll again for the next office, you smile faintly, shaking your head. You came here to watch monks eat in silence, and instead you've stumbled into the parliament of cheese. The chapter meeting leaves ripples in the abbey. The next evening, as you sit in the refectory, the meal begins with an odd solemnity. The bread is ordinary, the broth thin. But when the cellarer brings out the cheese, there's a murmur you can feel more than hear. Tonight, instead of the usual quick slicing, the abbot himself stands at the high table, knife in hand. Every monk leans forward. A new rule is being enacted. The cheese will be cut in public view. The mainstream fact ground the moment. Medieval abbots often took symbolic roles in enforcing fairness. By handling rations personally, they reminded the community that justice flowed from the top. Authority was not only in words, but in small, visible acts. An abbot cutting cheese, a prior pouring ale, a cellarer weighing bread. These gestures reinforced discipline more strongly than sermons. The knife presses down, clean to the rind, and the room exhales. One slice, then another, each measured with care, each displayed briefly before being passed. You see the monk's eyes darting, comparing, calculating, but less suspiciously than before. The abbot's hand seems to disarm envy, if only for tonight. The quirky tidbit sidles in. In one abbey's chronicle, an abbot cut cheese with such mathematical precision that visiting nobles compared him to a surveyor. The story claims he could divide a wheel into equal wedges without scales, guided only by sight and prayer. Imagine the reverence. Cheese slicing as a sacred skill, half geometry, half miracle. You almost laugh, picturing a monthly talent show, juggling candles, chanting psalms, and slicing wheels into perfect sevenths. Historians still argue whether these performances of fairness truly pacified resentment or merely delayed it. Did public slicing unite the brothers, or did it make them hyper-aware of portions? Perhaps both. The act became theater, and theater has power, sometimes healing, sometimes hollow. You bite your slice, savoring its ordinary tang. Yet tonight, it tastes different, flavored with ceremony. Even Brother Oswald, hawk-eyed as ever, seems calmer, nodding slightly as though acknowledging a victory. The novice across from you chews more slowly, perhaps comforted that his sliver was cut by the same hand as the abbot's. The silence feels less tense, more collective. The scripture reader's voice floats like smoke, soft and steady. For once, The meal feels like a single breath shared among many. You let yourself relax into it. The cheese dissolving on your tongue, the candlelight softening the stone around you. Afterward, the monks file into the cloister under moonlight. No one speaks, yet their steps seem lighter. A small ritual has shifted the air. Authority, fairness, and food have braided themselves into one. You linger, watching the shadows stretch long across the flagstones. The Abbey, for all its quarrels and suspicions, has found a rhythm again. Tomorrow envy may return. Tomorrow the scales may tip. But tonight there is balance. And in this world, balance is as rare and fleeting as a miracle. The calm from the abbot's public slicing lingers only a little while. Soon, whispers rise again, not about thickness or weight this time, but about waste. You follow the monks back into the kitchen after supper, and there the quarrel brews. A novice scrapes a rind into the refuse bucket, and Brother Oswald nearly combusts on the spot. His hand shoots out, grabbing the rind as if it were treasure. Nothing, his eyes scream, must be wasted. The mainstream fact anchors this scene. Medieval monasteries kept careful watch over waste. Food scraps were collected, sometimes fed to pigs, sometimes saved for the poor at the gate. Wasting even a rind of cheese was frowned upon, seen as both sin and scandal. Waste meant disrespect toward God's gifts, toward labor, toward fairness itself. The quirky tidbit slips in, tangy as curd. Some abbeys have specific rules that even cheese rinds must be eaten, boiled into stews, or softened in ale. There's even a note from one chronicle describing monks rubbing rinds on bread for flavor when no full cheese was left. You nearly laugh at the image. Medieval grilled cheese, minus the melt. Historians still argue whether strict anti-waste measures were effective discipline or just another layer of monastic guilt. Did every rind really end up in a pot, or were these rules aspirational, more sermon than practice? The truth is murky, like broth thickened with crumbs. You watch the novice shrink under Oswald's glare, cheeks flushed, hands trembling. Another monk steps in, gently taking the rind and tucking aside, muttering that it will go to the guesthouse pigs. Oswald's eyes narrow, but he relents, barely. His obsession with fairness extends even to scraps. In his ledger of justice, every crumb counts. Later, in the refectory, the slices seem smaller than ever, though perhaps that's just a memory of scraps gnawing at you. You chew your wedge thoughtfully, wondering how many rinds have been saved, boiled, softened, or slipped to pigs in centuries past. Even waste here carries moral weight. The silence feels heavier tonight. The scripture reader drones on about stewardship, about multiplying talents and guarding gifts. The words land differently now, echoing against the sight of a rind plucked from a bucket like gold. You smirk faintly, imagining future historians debating the great rind rescue of St. Oswald's Abbey. When the meal ends, the bowls are cleared with exaggerated care. No crumb is left behind, no rind forgotten. The monks file out, robes whispering against stone, their eyes heavy with both discipline and fatigue. You drift after them, step slow, the smell of cheese clinging still to your fingers. In the cloister, the night air is cool, the fountains drip steady. You lean against a pillar, listening to sandals scuff the floor. Waste, fairness, scraps, miracles. It all blurs together in the Abbey's hum. Cheese is not just food here. It is a sermon, a law, a test, and sometimes a quarrel salvaged by a rind. The next few days pass in an odd rhythm. Scraps saved, scales weighed, silence held. But beneath it all simmers another storm. The Abbey has been quarreling so long over fairness that the very question of what fair means has become tangled. Tonight, as you sit in the refectory, the abbot rises once more, this time not with knife in hand, but with words. His voice carries slowly through the hall. The time has come to reconsider how fairness itself will be judged. The mainstream fact grounds this moment. Medieval monastic houses often revise their internal rules through custom. While the rule of St. Benedict provided the framework, abbots interpreted it differently across centuries, adapting to circumstance. Debates about fairness, whether in labor, prayer, or food, were part of this living tradition. Rules were not static. They bent and reshaped like dough in strong hands. The quirky tidbit sneaks in. A record survives of one abbey that tried dividing cheese according to age. Elders receive the soft middle, novices the tougher rinds, under the idea that wisdom deserves reward. Another abbey went the opposite direction, giving younger monks more for strength, leaving seniors to chew humility. Both approaches claim fairness, yet neither satisfied everyone. You grin, imagining an abbot pitching this like a medieval loyalty program, only to watch him be sprout again anyway. Historians still argue whether these adaptations improve community life or just deepen divisions. Was fairness best enforced through equality, through need, or through hierarchy? The debates ripple through scholarly ink as endlessly as they ripple through these stone halls. Tonight, you see the same pattern play out in real time. The abbot proposes a compromise. Portions will no longer be perfectly equal, but will bend to circumstance, health, labor, age. He speaks calmly, his voice steady, but his eyes flicker toward Brother Oswald, who stiffens visibly. To Oswald, fairness must be exact, or it is no fairness at all. His lips tighten, his gaze burns, but he bows without protest, the gesture brittle as dry parchment. The meal begins, the cellarer cutting slices under the abbot's watchful eye. You notice at once the difference. Brother Matthew, coughing weakly, receives a thicker wedge. A young novice, pale from chores, gets more than usual. Others accept thinner slices with bowed heads. The hall holds its breath, watching for sparks. And then, astonishingly, nothing happens. No outburst, no muttered curses, only the steady rhythm of chewing. Even Oswald chews in silence, though his jaw works harder than necessary, as if grinding fairness itself between his teeth. You bite your own portion slowly, tasting not just cheese, but experiment. The silence feels different, fragile but hopeful, like glass stretched thin. Perhaps this new fairness will hold. Perhaps it will fracture tomorrow. For now, at least, the air is calmer than expected. Later, in the cloister, whispers flicker like candlelight. Some brothers murmur gratitude, others voice unease, but no one raises voice or fist. The fountain drips steadily, the arches stand patient, and you realize the abbey has not solved fairness. It has only shifted it. Yet that shift feels like progress, even if temporary. You close your eyes, breathing in the cool stone air, and think, fairness here is never final. It is a wheel cut again and again, its shape changing with every knife stroke. And somehow, through all the envy, silence, and prayer, the wheel continues to turn. The abbey's experiment with flexible fairness holds for a handful of days, but then a fresh complication arrives. You wander into the cloister one evening and find the cellarer bent over a strange wooden chest. He lifts the lid, and inside glimmer new scales, brass, polished, finer than the clunky set used before. They're a gift from a benefactor, meant to improve justice. You can already feel Brother Oswald vibrating with glee. The mainstream fact slips in. Monasteries prize tools of precision. Scales, hourglasses, astrolabes, objects that measured time, weight, or space carried spiritual authority, as well as practical use. To measure well was to honor God's order in creation. Fairness, after all, was seen as part of divine harmony. The quirky tidbit jingles along. In one abbey record, monks argued about whether scales themselves could be biased. A wheel placed slightly off-center, a pan polished unevenly. Even a draft through the refectory could tip judgment. One chronicle notes a cellarer accused of leaning the scale with his elbow. You nearly laugh. Ancient accusations of rigged equipment. Centuries before rigged dice. Historians still argue whether such disputes reflected real cheating, or simply the paranoia of hungry men. Was bias intentional, or were monks projecting envy onto innocent brass? Tonight, as you watch Oswald polish the shining pans, you realize either explanation feels possible. The next meal begins with ceremony. The new scales sit at the high table, gleaming like relics. The abbot nods solemnly, and the cellarer sets each slice upon them, weighing to the fraction. The monks watch with hawk eyes, silence buzzing louder than a beehive. Each wedge is passed only after balance is confirmed. You chew slowly, tasting no different cheese, but feeling a difference in air. Justice is louder here now, brass clinking before every bite. The ritual stretches a meal longer, makes hunger wait, but also dampens envy. For once, Even Thomas seems pacified. Only Oswald's lips twitch, as though he wishes the scales could weigh souls as well as slices. After supper, in the cloister, novices whisper about the magic of the new scales. One insists they gleam brighter than ordinary brass, proof of divine approval. Another swears the pans rang like bells when cheese touched them. You chuckle softly. Cheese weighed as sacrament, scales mistaken for relics. But beneath the humor lies tension. What happens when the scales tip wrong? When one monk insists the pans favor another? Already, you sense Oswald itching for the first misbalance, eager to pounce on imperfection. The tool meant to settle fairness may yet sharpen it. You lean against a pillar, the night air cool, the fountain's rhythm steady. The abbey has put its trust in brass and balance, but you know hunger makes skeptics of everyone. Tomorrow, the scales may gleam just as bright, and envy may burn just as hot. For now, you let the quiet hold you, knowing fairness here will always wobble, no matter how polished the pans. Night settles over the abbey like a heavy cloak, and you feel it immediately. How the air cools, how the stones surrender their warmth, how the corridors sharpen into narrow rivers of moonlight. You walk them slowly, soft-footed, and hear the small sounds that survive after Compline. A cough swallowed by a sleeve, the sleepy rasp of sandals, the distant drip of the fountain. And then, underneath everything, your own stomach rumbles in traitorous bass. You press your palm against your robe as though a quiet hand could negotiate with hunger. It can't. Hunger wants terms. You drift into the dormitory, that long hall of low pallets and higher discipline, where the brothers lie like commas between prayers. The rule here is ancient and simple. After the final office, silence is total. No late chatter. No candle kept burning. No sneaking to the kitchen for a private negotiation with a wheel of cheese. The mainstream fact glides in beside you. Monastic communities in the Latin West typically observe the great silence from Compline until the next day's office. A nocturnal hush meant to rest the tongue, the mind, and the soul. Beneath that stillness, the body is expected to behave itself. The body rarely got the memo. You hear it in stereo now. Small stomachs rehearsing thunder, measured breaths turning into quiet whistling, a monk shifting, because the mattress of straw makes a case of discomfort every 20 minutes. You lie down with them in imagination, face turned toward the rafters, and begin the oldest monkish trick you can steal, counting prayers like sheep. 1 pater, 2 pater, 3. Your belly interrupts with complaint so well-timed it could collect applause, if applause were permitted. You smirk into the dark. The joke is on you, delivered by your own digestion. You remember how the abbot cut the cheese in public a few nights ago, how the new brass scales chime faintly, how Brother Oswald scanned the pans as if salvation had a unit of measure. Fairness has been weighed, the ledger updated, even the Rhines redeemed, but night recalibrates all justice. The portions are gone. Only one remains, steady as the moon. You turn on your side and repeat a psalm under your breath. Each verse a little stepping stone laid across the river between now and sleep. A pallet creaks nearby. Someone coughs. Somewhere, you suspect, a novice imagines the cellar door opening itself like a miracle. No footsteps, no hinges, just a gentle slide, and a halo will rolling out to greet him. The thought almost makes you laugh aloud, and you bite your knuckle instead. The Abbey would hardly appreciate you auditioning as a midnight clown. Joke 1. Kept safely internal. If the cheese did roll itself down the corridor, Brother Oswald would sprint after it with the scales, insisting on weighing the miracle before believing it. Your eyes adjust to the moonlight enough to draw the outline of the hall. Rows of robes, a forest of wooden posts, the faint knit of the roof. Under the rafters, swallows have nested, and every now and then a feather falls with such gentleness that you wonder if the whole building is exhaling. You settle into the listening, the kind that stacks minutes into a tower. You think of the mold debate, of the nettles wrapped around wheels to fend off damp, of the Rhine rescue from the refuse pail. The whole monastic drama, recited by day with scales and ledgers, compresses at night into a single syllable the body repeats. Still hungry. The quirky tidbit arrives in a hushed grin. Some medieval advice books, keen on guarding chastity of mind during the Great Silence, recommended a curious anti-temptation technique. wearing a small belt of knotted cord to remind the flesh not to wander. In a few houses, brothers allegedly tied a knot at the waist specifically to deter midnight visits to the pantry. Imagine that, a literal hunger knot, a bow around your belly like a scribbled note. Do not open until lauds. The idea is equal parts earnest and adorable. You picture Brother Thomas fumbling with knots in the dark, then giving up and counting psalms with extra dramatics. You shift again. The straw scuffs your shoulder. Your stomach, unimpressed by knots or prayers, files a second complaint. You consider the infirmary's lore. Soft cheese for headaches, sage for nerves, and wonder whether monks ever believe a single imaginary bite might soothe the humors. Historians still argue whether nocturnal discipline was mostly interior victory or supported by secret leniencies. Did infirmarians keep a tiny bowl of curds for the sick who woke at midnight, or were the rules as tight as the knots? The sources murmur both ways, and the dark is not telling. You step, quietly, carefully, into the cloister walk, where the moon lays bright rectangles on flags. Your bare feet find a chill in the stones, and that cold anchors you better than any sermon. You count your breaths and pretend they are grains of salt sprinkled on a small slice shared in memory, the way pilgrims compared abbeys by wedges. Remember that family who portioned crumbs of children? The thought takes the edge off. Generosity is a flavor the mind can taste even without a plate. Joke, too, taps your shoulder. If thoughts had calories, the abbey would need a second cellar by morning. A shadow moves in the corner. It is only the porter doing his rounds, lantern shaded, eyes as kind as the fire he carries. He nods without breaking the great silence. Permission granted to the sleepless without asking why. You return the nod and continue pacing, a slow loop that matches a fountain's drip. The water makes a gentle arithmetic of time. Drip, 2 heartbeats, drip, 2 heartbeats, and you let it count for you when your mind refuses. You think of the chapter house debate where fairness was reimagined to bend toward need. In the day, that felt like a triumph of mercy. At night, mercy sometimes is as simple as a posture. You hug your ribs with your arms, soften your jaw, loosen your brow. The body reads these as promises. You are not in danger. This is not a famine. Morning is real. The body, suspicious animal that it is, considers your evidence and, grudgingly, accepts a provisional ceasefire. Back in the dormitory, a novice fails a whisper and lets out the faintest "oh." No rebuke follows. Perhaps the others are merciful, perhaps asleep, perhaps doing their own bargaining with breath and bead. You lie down again. This time you count backward, not prayers but the steps from cellar to refectory. 15 from the door to the first shelf, 3 to the big wheel, 2 to the knife, 1 to a decision. Then you reverse the count, back from the decision to the knife, from the knife to the shelf, from the shelf to the door you do not open. The walk becomes a liturgy of not doing, and you feel, to your surprise, a thread of pride lays through the hunger. Joke 3 arrives late, tripping over its hem. If self-control were edible, the abbey would have cheesed for centuries. You smile in the dark, the kind of smile no one can hear. The quiet grows wider. The rafters stop creaking. Even your stomach tries a truce, swapping rumble for a polite gurgle that sounds, you decide, like an amen. You turn once more and let the mind run its warmest loop. The abbot's knife steady in candlelight, the scales ringing softly, a rescued rind cubed into tomorrow's broth. The rumor of a multiplying will toll in a voice like wool, a pilgrim's grin over a tiny wedge. The infirmarian's hand on his shoulder, slipping a crumb as if it were a blessing. Each image lays another blanket over the hours. By the time you reach the memory of rosemary hung to sweeten the scriptorium air, the knot around your hunger loosens. Somewhere far in the dark, a bell rope answers the wind with a shy clink. Dawn is not yet near, but you feel its promise walking toward you. You wrap your robe a little tighter, taste the phantom tang of fairness, however imperfect, on your tongue and breathe. The abbey does not move, but the night does, and you finally drift with it, a small boat sliding from pier to open, your last conscious thought of quiet, stubborn comfort. Tomorrow's slice will come. You will weigh it, or you won't, and you will eat, and you will smile at whoever sits beside you, because you made it through this fine and foolish hunger without waking the knives. Morning slides into the abbey with pale light. and the bell's familiar clang, and you shuffle into the refectory alongside the monks. You expect the usual wedge and the usual silence, but instead you notice the abbot standing tall, a parchment in his hand. His voice, steady as the knife he wields at supper, announces a new decree. From this day forward, the abbey will adopt communal portions. No more weighing slices on scales. Instead, whole rounds of cheese will be placed at each table, and brothers will cut for themselves. Trust, not brass, will determine fairness. The mainstream fact sets the scene. Some medieval monasteries did, indeed, experiment with communal bowls, loaves, or wheels. Rather than exact divisions, they trusted in mutual restraint, teaching charity by making each monk partly responsible for the other. It was a gamble, relying on discipline rather than measurement, but it aimed at shaping humility in a way scales never could. The quirky tidbit edges in. There are records of abbeys carving cheese into decorative shapes at feasts, crosses, doves, even wheels inscribed with verses, then setting them in the middle of tables for everyone to cut. These weren't just meals, they were edible sermons. You can't help but grin, imagining Oswald trying to sermonize with crumbs as punctuation. Historians still argue whether communal portions truly foster harmony, or whether they ignited silent competitions of appetite. Did monks genuinely learn charity, or did the boldest simply learn to cut quickly? The evidence wavers like candlelight, leaving modern scholars as suspicious as any hungry novice. Tonight, though, the abbot frames a change as trust in God's providence. The rounds arrive, golden and fragrant, thudding onto the oak tables. Brothers glance sideways, hesitant hands hovering near knives. And then, slowly, the ritual unfolds. One monk slices modestly, passing the wheel along. Another follows, eyes low, knife steady. The wheel turns, portion after portion, until it rests lighter but not empty at the table's end. You bite your own slice carefully, watching faces. There's a strangeness in this new freedom. Some brothers glow with relief, glad to see the scales retired. Others twitch with unease, as though fairness without brass is no fairness at all. Oswald, predictably, chews like thunderclouds, though he says nothing. His silence is not surrender, it is waiting. Later, in the cloister, whispers carry like incense. Some call the change liberating. Others mutter about temptation. You sense both are right. Trust is its own kind of burden, heavier than brass, sharper than knives. As night falls, you think back on a long chain of quarrels. Crumbs counted, rinds rescued, scales polished, and realize this new chapter is not an ending but another test. Fairness has shifted from the weight of brass to the weight of conscience, and conscience is harder to balance. You lean against a cold pillar, the fountain dripping nearby, and whisper to yourself the simplest of conclusions. Cheese is never just cheese here. It is law, it is story, it is experiment, and it is a fragile bridge between hunger and holiness. The communal wheels remain on the table for a week, and you watch the experiment wobble like a cart on uneven stones. At first, there is restraint. Monks cutting modest slices, eyes lowered, knives careful not to scrape too far into the golden rind. But hunger always whispers, and soon patterns emerge. Some brothers cut larger, some smaller. Some hesitate so long that the cheese seems to melt under their stares. You can feel tension creeping back in, like ivy winding over stone. The mainstream fact roots the moment. Medieval notions of fairness weren't only about equality, but about order. The abbey believed food distribution reflected heavenly justice. Too much appetite was a vice. Too little confidence could be weakness. The communal wheel wasn't just sustenance. It was a test of virtue, staged nightly in silence. The quirky tidbit stirs the broth. One abbey's chronicle describes a wheel so prized that it was chained to the refectory table to prevent theft between meals. Imagine that. Cheese in shackles, like a prisoner of appetite. You nearly laugh aloud picturing Oswald arguing with an iron chain about fairness, scales dangling from his belt. Historians still argue whether these rules shaped genuine humility or just fueled a culture of suspicion. Did restraint come from faith or from fear of being judged? Was charity taught, or was envy merely concealed behind folded hands? The debates echo as loudly in modern studies as in the medieval halls themselves. At supper tonight, you watch Brother Thomas, always dramatic, cut a thin sliver, sighing heavily as though to advertise his humility. A novice across the table, emboldened, slices thicker. You brace for sparks, but nothing happens, only silence, knives scraping quietly, eyes flickering like candle flames. The abbot, seated at the head, says nothing. His eyes are calm but unreadable, as if measuring something weightier than portions. Perhaps he sees the experiment as a mirror, each cut revealing character, each wheel around a silent confession. After the meal, the wheel at your table is lighter than usual, the rind ragged from uneven cuts. The cellarer gathers it carefully, his face unreadable, and you sense the murmurs gathering already for tomorrow. In the cloister, shadows lengthen, the fountain whispers, and you realize the abbey has not solved fairness, but only shifted its battlefield once again. From brass scales to sharpened knives, from ounces to gestures. You smile faintly, half amused, half weary. Cheese in this place has been many things. A sermon, a quarrel, a miracle, and now a mirror. You lean into the cool stone, knowing the next chapter of the abbey's odd debate is already forming in whispers, and the wheel will roll forward, uneven but unstoppable. The final days of this long experiment arrive quietly, like dawn slipping over a hill. You walk with the monks to the refectory, the wheel set out as usual, knives waiting, silence braced. But tonight feels different, as though the abbey itself exhales. The quarrels have dulled, the scales lie forgotten, the ledgers gather dust. Even Brother Oswald, though still sharp-eyed, seems weary of the fight. You realize you have reached the last act of this strange and sleepy play. The monks are not arguing about fairness anymore. They are living with it, uneven and imperfect, like every other human attempt at balance. The mainstream fact grounds a moment. Over centuries, monastic orders slowly softened their rules on food. As agriculture improved, portions grew, fasting ease and fairness shifted into broader rhythms of hospitality and charity. The fierce debates of earlier generations gave way to quieter customs, more practical than perfect. The quirky tidbit adds its smile. One abbey's records mention a wheel of cheese gifted to the local town each year, carved with a monastery seal. It was called the peace cheese, meant to remind villagers and monks alike that abundance tasted better than arguments. Imagine Oswald stamping his approval in the curds. Solemn as ever, yet perhaps secretly pleased. Historians still argue whether such shifts were decline or wisdom. Did monasteries lose their rigor, or did they gain mercy? Was the easing of food rules betrayal of ideals, or evolution toward a more livable holiness? The debate remains open, but here, in this dim hall, you sense mercy has won a small round. The wheel passes, knives scrape, portions fall, and you chew slowly, not because the cheese is new, but because the silence is lighter. Fairness, you realize, was never solved by scales or knives. It was solved, if solved at all, by patience, by practice, by the long, weary grace of living together. You step into the cloister afterward. The fountain drips. The moon leans across stone. The air is cool. You feel the story drawing to its close, like a candle burning down to its last steady flame. You walk through quarrels, rinds, scales, miracles, scraps, envy, mercy, and now at the end, you stand in stillness. The abbey will argue again tomorrow. You know, it is their nature and yours too. But for tonight, there is peace and a slice on your tongue and silence all around. And now, as the story softens, let yourself drift with it. Imagine the abbey's long stone halls empty of quarrel, the candles guttering low. The last will tuck safely away for tomorrow. The fountain in the cloister drips at its unhurried pace, a steady lullaby written in water. You walk slowly along the colonnade, your footsteps quiet, your robe brushing against the cool stone. Above, the night sky spreads wide, scattered with pale stars. Each one is a small reminder that the world has always been larger than arguments, that fairness, like cheese, is only one part of life's long banquet. The monks around you have already settled. They're breathing even, their shoulders loose, their bellies, whether full or not, content enough to sleep. The silence of the abbey now feels gentle, not strict. It does not demand. It invites. You pause beside the fountain, listening to the trickle echo through the arches, and you let that sound become your own rhythm of rest. The cool air brushes your face like a blessing, and even Brother Oswald's frown, if he wears it in his dreams, has softened. The story has carried you through quarrels and scales, through scraps and legends, through envy and compromise, and yet at the end it brings you here, into stillness, into ease. There is no need for fairness now, no need for counting, no need for scales or ledgers. Only the quiet, the night, and your own slow breath. So let yourself settle. Loosen your hands, soften your brow, and let your eyes grow heavy. The abbey fades, the fountain hushes, the stars dim. Sleep waits patiently, gentle as a monk's whisper, ready to gather you in.